Yo, what's up everyone? It's Supreme Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Gringotts medical healer examined Harry at age 8 and found 28 illegal tracking runes. Dumbledore 43-year control plot. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Healer's Hands. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the sort of unremarkable detail that made what followed all the more extraordinary. It came addressed to the Dursleys, which was unusual enough that Vernon nearly choked on his morning bacon. The envelope was made of thick cream parchment, sealed with a crest Harry didn't recognize, a mountain with a door carved into its face, and beneath it, words in a language that made his eyes water slightly when he tried to read them. Vernon snatched it before Harry could study it properly, read it twice with increasingly purple coloring, and then made a sound like a kettle about to burst. "What is it?" Petunia asked, her neck already stretching toward the letter the way it always did when she sensed something abnormal. "Bank," Vernon said. He said it the way other people might say plague. "Wants to send someone. Today. Says it's mandatory under some blasted magical inheritance law." He slapped the letter onto the table. "Says if we refuse, they'll report us to their ministry." Harry stood by the sink with his dishcloth still in his hand and said nothing. He had learned very early that saying nothing was the safest response to most things in this house. Petunia took the letter, read it, and her face did something complicated, a war between her carefully maintained hatred of anything magical and a flicker of what Harry had learned to recognize as fear. Not fear of magic, exactly. Fear of being found out. "Let them come," she said finally, setting the letter down with the precise care of someone handling something they wish they could burn. "We have nothing to hide." Her eyes didn't meet Vernon's when she said it. Harry went back to washing dishes and thought about the mountain on the crest, and the door carved into its face, and the words that hurt to read. The man who arrived at 4 o'clock that afternoon was not, strictly speaking, a man. He was 3.5 feet tall, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved by someone working quickly and not particularly interested in conventional beauty, a strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, ears that came to subtle points, and eyes the color of old amber that missed absolutely nothing. He wore healer's robes of deep green with silver stitching at the collar, and he carried a bag that was clearly much larger on the inside, because it contained far too many things to fit in something that size. Vernon answered the door and immediately looked like he wanted to close it again. "Healer Rotgut," the goblin said, in a voice that was precise and carried the faint suggestion that it had never once been used to make small talk. "Of Gringotts Magical Healing Division. You are Vernon Dursley." It wasn't a question. "I'm here to conduct the Inheritance Health Assessment for Harrison James Potter. Under the Magical Inheritance Verification Act of 1867, you are legally obligated to provide access. This visit is non-optional and has been logged with the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Do you understand?" Vernon understood. He stepped back. He didn't say a word. Rotgut walked into number 4, Privet Drive, looked around the aggressively normal sitting room with the expression of someone cataloging evidence, and then looked at Harry, who was standing at the bottom of the stairs in jeans that were 3 sizes too large and a shirt that had once belonged to Dudley and still had the ghost of a Smeltings logo on the chest. The goblin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, not to Vernon, not to Petunia, but directly to Harry, "Are you Harrison James Potter?" "Harry," Harry said. "Just Harry." "Harry." Rotgut nodded once, as if filing this away. "I'm going to need to examine you. This will take approximately 2 hours. It won't hurt." He paused. "The scan won't hurt. What I find may be another matter, but the scan itself is painless. Do you consent?" Harry blinked. Nobody had asked him if he consented to anything before. He wasn't entirely sure what the right answer was. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Signs of magical development consistent with your bloodline inheritance. Blocks, suppressants, any external magical interference." Rotgut was still watching him with those amber eyes. Standard procedure for heirs of significant magical families who have been living outside the magical world. And if you find something, then I report it. The goblin's jaw was set in a way that suggested the reporting would be neither gentle nor optional. Do you consent, Harry Potter? Harry looked at his aunt and uncle. Petunia was very still. Vernon was very red. Yes, Harry said. I consent. They set up in the sitting room, which Rotgut quietly rearranged by moving the coffee table to one side with a muttered word that made it slide across the carpet on its own. He produced a folding examination table from his bag, it unfolded like origami, smooth and silent, and a series of instruments that Harry couldn't name, small silver things that caught light in ways that didn't quite match the angle of the windows. Sit here, Rotgut said, patting the table. Harry sat. He was eye level with the goblin standing, which felt strange in a way that wasn't unpleasant. The goblin moved around him with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and never stopped taking it seriously. I'm going to cast a diagnostic matrix, Rotgut said, not looking for permission this time but explaining, which Harry appreciated more than he could articulate. It will show up as light around your body. Don't be alarmed. Okay, Harry said. Rotgut raised one hand, no wand, Harry noticed, just a hand with long, clever fingers, and spoke something in that same eye-watering language from the envelope. The air around Harry turned faintly luminescent. Not a dramatic, flashing sort of light. More like the quality of light that comes through autumn leaves, layered and warm and shifting. Vernon made a noise from the doorway. Rotgut didn't look at him. Harry watched the goblin's face as he began to read whatever the light was showing him. For the first 30 seconds, the expression stayed professional, neutral, the face of a doctor doing a routine check. Then something shifted, so small Harry almost missed it. A tightening around the eyes. A pause. Rotgut raised his other hand and made an adjustment to the spell. The light changed quality, cooler, more precise, a surgical kind of illumination. He leaned forward. His jaw was working slightly, like he was doing math in his head and not entirely liking the answer. Harry, he said, in a tone that was careful without being frightened, how old are you? 8, Harry said. 8 and a bit. And how long have you lived at this address? Since I was 1. Since my parents, he stopped. Since the night they died. Rotgut was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, I'm going to bring in a second layer of diagnostic. This one will make the runes visible. He looked at Harry directly. Do you know what runes are? Symbols with magic in them, Harry said. I read about them in the school library. Not the magical school, the normal one. There was a book about Norse mythology. Close enough. Rotgut took a small crystal vial from his bag, uncorked it, and let a single drop of whatever was inside fall to the floor. It hit the carpet and bloomed outward like ink in water, spreading in a perfect circle that enclosed both of them. The light around Harry changed. It went from warm autumn gold to something colder, whiter, more clinical, and then Harry saw Rotgut's expression, and the bottom of his stomach dropped, because the goblin's face had gone very still in the way that faces go still when the person behind them is working very hard not to show what they're feeling. What is it? Harry asked. Rotgut didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly around Harry, one full circuit, studying the light the way Harry had once seen a detective study a crime scene in one of the library books. Then he walked around again. Rotgut, Harry said. He kept his voice calm. He'd always been good at keeping his voice calm when things were going wrong, it was a survival skill, living with the Dursleys. What did you find? The goblin stopped in front of him. His amber eyes were something Harry couldn't quite read. Do your aunt and uncle need to be in this room? Rotgut asked. Harry looked over at them. Vernon's face had gone from red to an odd grayish purple. Petunia's hands were clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles were white. No, Harry said. They don't. Rotgut turned. You may wait in the kitchen, he told the Dursleys. "This is a private medical examination. You will be informed of the results in due course." "Now see here," Vernon started. "Under the Magical Inheritance Verification Act, guardians may be excluded from the examination at the patient's request when the patient is old enough to provide independent consent. Harry Potter provided consent. He requested privacy." The goblin's voice was perfectly pleasant and completely immovable. "The kitchen. Please." They went. Petunia didn't look at Harry as she passed him. She hadn't looked at him, Harry realized, since the moment Rotgut walked into the house. When the door swung shut, Rotgut pulled a stool from his bag, it came out already unfolded, sat down across from Harry, and looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to explain what I've found," he said. "I'll use plain language. If I use a term you don't understand, stop me." "All right," Harry said. "Runes can be carved into objects, written onto surfaces, or, in rare cases, etched onto living skin. The last category is heavily regulated and in most cases entirely illegal without explicit consent and documented medical necessity." Rotgut's eyes were steady on his. "You have runes on you, Harry. Not carved into your skin, you'd see those, they'd leave marks. These are deeper. They're embedded in your magical core. Think of your magical core as the part of you that magic comes from, like a heartbeat. These runes are woven into it like foreign thread in a piece of cloth. They've been there a long time. Most of them were placed when you were very young. Some were placed at birth." Harry said, "How many?" Rotgut didn't look away. 28. The number sat between them in the quiet sitting room for a long moment. Outside, a car went by. A neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. 28, Harry said. "What do they all do?" "I've catalogued them as best I can from the diagnostic." The goblin reached into his bag and produced a piece of parchment that shouldn't have been writable on the fly, but apparently he'd already been writing notes. "There are 4 categories. Tracking runes, 7 of them. They broadcast your location continuously to at least 3 separate receivers. Suppression runes, 9. These compress your magical output, preventing your core from growing at its natural rate. You should be producing significantly more magical energy than you currently are. You are, this is the technical term, magically stunted. Not permanently. But intentionally." Harry felt something cold and clear settle through him. He didn't say anything. He let the goblin continue. Loyalty and compulsion runes, 6. These create emotional predispositions. Mild but consistent ones. Feelings of trust and deference toward specific individuals. Feelings of anxiety when certain thoughts arise, self-preservation instincts being suppressed, specifically the instinct to seek help or report harm. Rotgut's voice didn't waver, but something behind his eyes was very fierce. "The last category is 7 runes I'd classify as conditioning marks. Designed to shape personality over time. Compliance. Self-deprecation. The tendency to minimize your own needs." The room was very quiet. "The compulsion runes," Harry said, and his voice was impressively steady for an 8-year-old boy who had just been told that his personality had been sculpted by someone else's hands. "Who are they pointed at?" "The trust ones." Rotgut looked at him for a moment. "You're taking this very calmly." "I'm taking it the way it needs to be taken," Harry said. "Who?" The goblin set the parchment on his knee. "The runes themselves don't carry names. But I can read the magical signature of whoever cast them. Runes this complex, this layered, they carry the fingerprint of their creator like a painting carries the style of its artist." He paused. "The signature on all 28 runes is the same." "Who?" Harry said again. "I don't know the name yet," Rotgut said. "But I will. I'm going to take a full impression of the signature, and our runic analysts at Gringotts will identify it within 48 hours. Whoever cast these is not unknown, Rune work this sophisticated has a history. There will be a record. He tucked the parchment away. Harry. I want you to understand something. This is not your fault. None of this is, I know, Harry said. Not dismissively. Just, he knew. The clarity that had settled through him wasn't shock or numbness. It was something older than that, something he'd been building without knowing it, living in a house where he was always the problem, always the inconvenience, always the thing that needed managing. Can they be removed? Yes. It needs to be done carefully. Some of them are layered so that improper removal would cause a backlash to your core. But Gringotts has runic healers who specialize in exactly this. Rotgut's voice was firm. We will remove every single one. When? As soon as I have authorization. The goblin stood, squaring his shoulders with the air of someone who had been waiting to do something with his hands. Harry, I need to ask you something now, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you feel safe in this house? Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about his first 6 years of life spent in a space 3 feet wide and 5 feet long, with spiders for company and the sound of normal family life filtering through the door like it belonged to another world. He thought about going to bed hungry, about the way Dudley's friends looked at him, about the careful art he developed of making himself very small in his own body. He thought about Petunia's face when Rotgut had walked in. That complicated, frightened look. Fear of being found out. No, he said. Simply. Factually. Rotgut nodded once, like this answer had confirmed something he already knew. Then we're going to fix that too, the goblin said. The conversation with the Dursleys lasted 11 minutes. Harry wasn't in the room for most of it, but he heard Rotgut's voice carrying from the kitchen, level, relentless, precise, and he heard Vernon's voice rising and then being firmly cut off, and he heard Petunia make a sound once that might have been a protest and might have been something else entirely. When Rotgut came back into the sitting room, he was writing in a small leather book with a quill that had no inkwell but kept producing words. You'll be coming with me, the goblin said, not looking up. Tonight. I've informed your guardians that Gringotts is exercising its right of medical custody under the Inheritance Act pending a full investigation of your health situation. They won't be filing a complaint. How do you know they won't? Rotgut did look up then, and the expression on his face was the closest thing to grim satisfaction Harry had ever seen. Because I explained to them, very clearly, that an investigation would necessarily involve reviewing exactly how a magical child came to have 28 illegal runes on his core while living in their home. And that the DMLE takes a particular interest in cases of magical neglect and interference. He tucked the quill away. Your uncle turned an interesting shade of mauve. Harry looked around the sitting room. The too large furniture. The family photos on the wall that he'd never been in. The aggressive beige of a house that had never wanted him in it. I need to get my things, he said. Of course. Take whatever is yours. Harry went upstairs. He came back down 7 minutes later with a backpack. Rotgut looked at it, genuinely small, stuffed but not heavy, and something in the goblin's expression shifted minutely, but he didn't comment. Is that everything? Rotgut asked. It's everything that's mine, Harry said. They walked out the front door. Harry didn't look back at the house. He heard Petunia in the kitchen, heard the creak of a chair, heard Vernon clear his throat. None of them came to the door. He thought he should feel something about that. He thought he probably would, later. Right now he just felt the evening air on his face and the solid weight of his backpack and the strange new sensation of walking next to someone who had, in the last 2 hours, treated him like he mattered. Where are we going? Harry asked. London, Rotgut said. Gringotts. The main branch. He was already writing in his small leather book as he walked, apparently comfortable doing both things at once. Director Ragnarok will want to be briefed tonight. Who's Director Ragnarok? The most powerful goblin in Britain. Rotgut finished whatever he was writing with a full stop that looked like he meant it. He's going to be very interested in you, Harry Potter. Is that good or bad? The healer glanced at him sideways. In my experience, it depends entirely on what you do with his attention. He tucked the book away. I suggest being exactly who you are. He doesn't have much patience for performance. I don't know how to do anything else, Harry said. Rotgut made a sound that, on a different face, might have been the beginning of a smile. They turned the corner onto the main road, and Privet Drive disappeared behind them, and Harry Potter began to understand, distantly, tentatively, the way dawn is understood before you can quite see the sun, that his life was about to become an entirely different thing. Gringotts at night was not the same building it appeared to be in daylight. Harry had never been there before, obviously, he'd had no reason to go to London, and certainly no reason to visit a magical bank. He knew it from the same general knowledge he'd accumulated about the wizarding world from fragments and half-heard conversations and a single dog-eared book he'd found at a jumble sale once and hidden under the floorboard of his cupboard. But the Gringotts in the book had been described as grand and polished, all marble and gilded chandeliers. At night, with the doors opened by goblins who stepped aside for Rotgut with expressions of professional deference, it was something else. The marble was still there, and the chandeliers were still lit, by fire that burned in colors that weren't quite natural, but the building felt alive in the dark, in a way that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with power. The walls felt like they were paying attention. The floor felt like it remembered every foot that had ever crossed it. Harry noticed, as they crossed the main hall, that the goblins they passed were looking at him. Not the way people normally looked at him, the curious, nudging each other look he got sometimes in magical spaces, the is that him look, but with a quality of assessment, of calculation. He looked back. He had found that looking back at people who stared at you usually made them stop. Most of the goblins held his gaze for a beat before looking away. One, an older one with a scar along his jaw, gave him a very slight nod. Stop making eye contact with everyone, Rotgut said, without looking at him. Why? It's working. That's why. A pause. You can make eye contact with the director. Try not to smile too much. He finds it unsettling when humans smile at him like they mean it. What if I do mean it? Rotgut considered this. Then mean it. Just do it less broadly. They went through a door at the far end of the hall, a small, unremarkable door that should not have led, logically, to anywhere interesting, but which opened onto a corridor that spiraled slightly downward, lit by the same not quite natural fire. Harry's ears popped once, the way they did in high places, which was a strange sensation to have while walking underground. The director's office was at the end of the corridor and was the size of the Dursleys' entire ground floor. Its walls were covered in maps and ledgers and things Harry couldn't identify from the doorway. The desk was enormous, not in a compensatory, look how important I am way, but in a purely practical way, the way a work table is large because the work requires the space. Behind it sat a goblin who made Rotgut look young. Director Ragnarok was the oldest person Harry had ever been in the same room with, and that included Mrs. Fig, who had been ancient for as long as Harry could remember. He was ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, not frail, not diminished, but dense with time, with weight, with the accumulated pressure of decades. His hair was silver white, his eyes were amber like Rotgut's but darker, deeper, the color of amber that had things preserved inside it. His hands, folded on the desk, were perfectly still. He looked at Harry with those hands and those eyes and said, in a voice like gravel at the bottom of a very old river, "Sit." Harry sat in the chair in front of the desk. It was sized for a human, which he filed away as interesting, the director had expected him. Rotgut took the chair beside Harry and opened his leather book. "Report," Ragnarok said. What followed was the most precise 20 minutes of speech Harry had ever witnessed. Rotgut described every rune, every layer, every implication, using language that was technical and exact and left no room for ambiguity. He described the suppression, the tracking, the compulsion, the conditioning. He described the single unified magical signature. He described the living conditions at Privet Drive, the cupboard, the undersized clothing, the systematic pattern of neglect documented by the diagnostic secondary readings, which apparently showed nutritional deficiencies and a stress response pattern consistent with years of chronic low-level fear. Ragnar listened without expression. He didn't move. His eyes moved, tracking Rotgut's words with the precision of someone taking inventory. When Rotgut finished, there was a silence. Then Ragnar said, "How long to identify the signature?" "I've already submitted it to the runic analysis team," Rotgut said. 48 hours at the outside. I believe considerably less. And removal of the runes? I want to do it in stages. 7 days, minimum, to avoid core shock. Possibly 10. I'd like Healer Ironforge as a second. Her specialization in deep core runic interference is the best we have. Ragnar nodded once. Then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "You have questions," Ragnar said. It was, again, not a question. "A few," Harry said. "Can I ask one now?" Ragnar gestured with one hand, not a permission so much as an acknowledgement that Harry was going to ask regardless. "The person who put the runes on me," Harry said. "Whatever the signature turns out to be, what happens to them?" Ragnar's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not with displeasure. Something more like appraisal." "That depends," the director said, "on who they are." "Does it?" Harry said. The room was quiet for a moment. "You're 8 years old," Ragnar said. "I know," Harry said. "Does it matter?" Another silence. Longer this time. "In theory," Ragnar said, "the individual responsible for placing illegal runes on a magical minor, the heir to 2 significant noble houses, which you are, whether you knew it or not, has committed crimes against Gringotts, against the Ministry of Magic, against the International Confederation of Wizards, and against you personally. In theory, the full weight of every magical legal framework in Britain descends on them regardless of their identity." He paused. "In practice, it depends on who they are." "Because of politics," Harry said. "Because of power," Ragnar said. "Which is politics with the pretense removed." Harry thought about this. "Then we'd better be more powerful than them." The director looked at him. Something shifted in those dark amber eyes, not quite softness, not anything so simple as that. More like the moment when you pick up a stone and find it heavier than expected, in a way that makes you want to carry it properly. "Yes," Ragnar said. "We probably should be." He unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the desk. "You will stay in Gringotts for the duration of the rune removal process and for as long afterward as security requires. You will have quarters in the residential section. You will be fed." He said the last part with a directness that made Harry feel briefly, oddly seen. "Healer Rotgut will begin treatment tomorrow morning. In the meantime, you should sleep." "All right," Harry said. "You're not going to argue?" Rotgut asked, with a faint note of surprise. "You're trying to help me," Harry said. "Why would I argue with that?" Rotgut made the not-quite smile sound again. Ragnar simply looked at him for another moment, then made a note on something at his desk. "One more thing," Harry said. Ragnar raised an eyebrow. "My parents," Harry said. "James and Lily Potter. Their accounts. Their estate. Is any of it still, has anyone been accessing it? On my behalf?" The silence that followed this question was a different quality of silence than the ones before it. It had weight to it, the weight of something that had been known and not said. "We will discuss that," Ragnar said carefully, "after the rune removal. When you are in full capacity." "Is that because the answer is complicated?" Harry asked. "It's because the answer," the director said, "is going to make you very angry, and I would prefer you to be at full capacity when you receive it." Harry sat with that for a moment. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," Ragnar said. Harry was shown to rooms that were cut directly from the stone of the mountain, warm, somehow, despite being underground, lit by fire globes that adjusted their brightness when he moved around, furnished with a pragmatic comfort that felt more like respect than luxury. The bed was sized for him. There was a desk and a bookshelf that was already half full, not with textbooks or assigned reading, but with a mix of things: history, magical theory, a few novels, a book on goblin runic art that had illustrations he could already tell he'd spend hours looking at. He stood in the middle of the room for a moment, in his too large clothes with his small backpack, in a mountain that was also a bank, under the care of a 3.5-foot doctor who had looked at him and seen something worth finding. He had 28 illegal runes on his magical core. Someone had spent 8 years shaping him into something compliant and small and easy to manage. Someone had looked at a baby who'd survived something that shouldn't have been survivable and thought, I need to control that. Harry set his backpack on the desk. He sat on the bed. He looked at the fire globe on the ceiling, which had settled to a warm amber that was somehow exactly the right brightness without him having to ask. He thought about who he might be without 28 borrowed limitations. He thought about the coldness and the clarity of the last few hours, the way he'd taken in everything Rotgut said without flinching, the way he'd looked at Ragnak and said, does it matter? Because he'd genuinely wanted to know. He thought, I am going to find out who did this. And then, with the pragmatism of a child who has learned to sleep wherever sleep is available because you never know when the opportunity will end, he lay down, pulled the blanket up, and went to sleep in under 3 minutes. In the office below, Ragnak sat at his desk and read Rotgut's report twice more. Then he called for his senior legal advisor, his head of runic investigation, and his political liaison to the Wizengamot, all of whom arrived within the half-hour in various states of being summoned from their evening. He told them what had been found. He told them what he intended to do. When he was finished, his political liaison said, carefully, Director. If the signature resolves to who I think it might, this will not be a quiet process. No, Ragnak agreed. It won't be. There will be significant resistance. From the Ministry, from the Wizengamot. Possibly from, I am aware, Ragnak said, of the forces that may align against us. He set the report down. I am also aware that Harry Potter survived a killing curse at 15 months old, absorbed 28 control runes for 8 years without breaking, and walked into this office tonight and asked me whether justice was conditional on identity. He looked at his advisor. I don't think he's going to need our protection as much as we currently believe. His advisor was quiet. Begin the documentation process, Ragnak said. I want everything admissible before the signature is even confirmed. When we move on this, we move with every piece in place. They left. Ragnak sat alone in his office for a while, in the kind of quiet that comes from being very old and having seen many things come and go. He thought about a boy sleeping in a room 3 floors above him, in the mountain that held more gold and more secrets than anywhere else in magical Britain. He thought about the magical signature on 28 illegal runes, and the shape of it, and who in the wizarding world was capable of work that precise, that patient, that vast in its planning. He thought, you have made a significant miscalculation, Albus Dumbledore. Then he picked up his quill and began to write the most important legal document he had composed in 40 years. Chapter 2, The Weight of Stone. The first rune came out on a Wednesday morning, and it felt like pulling a thorn from a wound that had been there so long the body had started to grow around it. Healer Rotgut had explained the process the night before, sitting across from Harry at a small table in the residential corridor with cups of something hot that tasted like tea if tea had been invented by someone who took warmth very seriously. He'd explained it the way he explained everything, directly, without softening the edges, because he'd clearly already assessed that Harry didn't need edges softened. Your core is like a muscle that's been strapped down, Rotgut said. The runes are the straps. We remove them one at a time, starting with the suppression runes because those are doing the most immediate damage. After each removal, your core needs time to adjust to the new space it has. If we go too fast, the expansion is uncontrolled. That can be. He paused, selecting his word. Dramatic. Dramatic how? Harry asked. Unintentional magic. Significant unintentional magic. The kind that brings ceilings down. He wrapped both hands around his cup. We'll do 1 per day for the first week. Possibly 2 per day in the second week, depending on how you respond. And it will hurt? Rotgut looked at him steadily. Yes. Not during the removal, I'll have you under a numbing matrix for that. Afterward. As your core expands into the space. It will feel like, imagine you've had your hand clenched in a fist for 8 years, and then you open it. Harry had looked at his hand when Rotgut said that. Opened and closed his fingers. I can handle it, he said. I know you can, Rotgut said, with the simple certainty of someone who had been reading magical cores for decades and knew exactly what they were looking at. That's not what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about you pushing through it when you should be resting. There's a difference between handling pain and pretending it isn't there. Harry thought about that. I'll try to tell the difference. Good enough. The healing room was 3 levels below the residential corridor, deeper into the mountain, where the stone was older and the ambient magic was thick enough that Harry could feel it against his skin like humidity. Healer Ironforge was already there when they arrived. She was shorter than Rotgut, broader in the shoulder, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of hands that had clearly spent decades in very precise work. She looked at Harry with professional thoroughness. Core reads at 32% output, she said to Rotgut, in a tone that didn't pretend Harry wasn't in the room but also didn't invite him to respond. Considerably suppressed for his bloodline. I've reviewed the Potter inheritance records. His mother's core output history alone puts the baseline expectation at minimum double current levels. His mother? Harry asked. Ironforge looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were hazel, sharp. Lily Potter, née Evans. Not a pure blood, but magically exceptional. The Evans line has produced unusual core strength for 3 generations, though they've been largely Muggle-born and Muggle-raised and didn't recognize it as such. She tilted her head slightly. Did you know your mother was considered one of the most gifted witches of her generation? I don't know very much about my mother, Harry said. Something in Ironforge's expression shifted, brief, but real. Well, she said, after a moment. You'll have time to learn. They settled him on the same type of folding examination table, or perhaps an upgraded version, this one longer, with adjustable sections and various attachment points for the instruments. The 2 healers arranged with the choreographed ease of people who had worked together a long time. The healing room had its own kind of quiet, not like the quiet of an empty room but the quiet of stone that had been doing important things for centuries and didn't feel the need to make noise about it. Rotgut cast the numbing matrix first. It spread through Harry's body from the point of contact at his sternum, a cool, slightly fizzing sensation, like the feeling just before a limb goes to sleep but without the discomfort. His extremities grew distant. Not painless, not entirely, but muffled, like sounds heard through a wall. You're going to stay conscious, Ironforge said, on his left. That's intentional. We need you awake to monitor your core's response. Talk to us if anything feels wrong. What does wrong feel like? You'll know, Rotgut said, on his right. Trust your instincts. If something feels like more than discomfort, say so. All right. The first rune was a suppression mark, the outermost layer, Rotgut had explained, the one placed most recently. Harry couldn't see what they were doing exactly. He could feel it, dimly, the way you can feel a dentist working even through anesthetic, pressure and movement without the sharp edges of pain. He stared at the ceiling of the healing room, which was natural stone with veins of something that glittered faintly, and breathed steadily. Then the first rune came free. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no sound. Just a sudden sensation of space. Like a door opening in a room you'd been in so long you'd forgotten it had a door. Harry's breath caught. That's normal, Rotgut said immediately. What do you feel? Harry tried to find words for it. Bigger, he said. Inside. Like, I thought the room was this big, and it's actually bigger. Your core expanding, Ironforge said. She was watching one of her instruments with close attention. Output is already up. 38%. A pause. Interesting. Is that fast? Harry asked. Very, she said. It means the suppression was the primary limiter. Your core wants to run. She said it almost to herself, still watching the instrument. It's been wanting to run for 8 years. The adjustment afterward was what Rotgut had warned him about, a deep, spreading ache that started in the center of his chest and worked outward like the world's slowest bruise. Not unbearable. Harry had had worse from falls off Dudley's friends' bikes, and the one time Vernon had been particularly unsubtle about his feelings regarding Harry's existence. But it was persistent in the way that made you very aware of your own body. He spent the afternoon in the residential corridor, on a wide stone bench that had cushions on it, goblin furniture, which seemed designed to be used by people who wanted comfort without any fuss about it. He read one of the books from his shelf, a history of magical Britain that was considerably more honest about the conflicts between wizards and goblins than any book written by a wizard would have been, and ate a meal that a goblin cook brought him without being asked, real food, substantive and warm, the kind Harry had been quietly rationing himself to in his head without realizing he was doing it. He ate all of it. Then he read until the fire globe in the corridor dimmed itself, and then he went to sleep. On the third morning, the runic analysis report came back. Harry knew it had arrived because Rotgut came to collect him from breakfast with a quality of controlled urgency that the healer usually reserved for medical situations. He brought Harry to Ragnarok's office, where Ragnarok was already seated behind his enormous desk with a parchment in front of him and his political liaison, a younger goblin named Sharpclaw, who had the look of someone who had been awake most of the night, standing to one side. The parchment had writing on it in a formal runic script with a translation alongside. Harry didn't wait to be told. He read it. The magical signature on all 28 runes resolved to a single individual. The signature was on record at Gringotts. All significant magical practitioners were, their signatures captured in the course of their banking interactions, as standard practice. The signature matched perfectly, without ambiguity, without margin for error, to the vault access records and legal documentation of one person. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class. Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read the name. He read it again. He sat with it for the length of 3 full breaths. Then he looked up at Ragnarok. Tell me about the 43 years. Ragnarok's eyebrow moved. You said tomorrow. For the anger. Tell me now, Harry said. I can be angry and functional at the same time. Ragnarok looked at him for a moment, then said, Sharpclaw. The political liaison cleared his throat and opened a second parchment. Albus Dumbledore first made contact with Gringotts in relation to the Potter family in 1943, when he was a professor at Hogwarts and served as a witness to the drafting of your grandparents' will. At that time, his access was legitimate, legal, documented, and within his role as a trusted family friend. Sharpclaw's voice was precise and careful, the voice of someone reading a timeline they were still personally processing. In 1965, your grandparents, Fleamont and Euphemia Potter, died. Dumbledore was appointed co-executor of their estate alongside the Gringotts estate manager. This is where our records begin to show irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Harry asked. Expenditures from the Potter vaults that were authorized under Dumbledore's executor status and categorized as estate expenses, but which our analysts cannot reconcile with any legitimate estate activity. Sharpclaw turned a page. The amounts are not catastrophic, whoever managed this was careful. But over 12 years, between 1965 and 1977, approximately 40,000 galleons moved from secondary Potter holdings into accounts that dissolved shortly after each transaction. Untraceable in isolation. In aggregate, he looked up. A pattern. He was stealing from my family, Harry said. We believe so, Sharpclaw said. In 1977, your parents married and took direct control of the Potter estate, at which point the executor status became dormant. The irregular expenditures stopped. He turned another page. Then, in November 1981, your parents died. Dumbledore moved within 48 hours of their deaths. He placed you with your mother's sister, bypassing the Potter family's documented wishes that you be placed with at least 3 alternate families, Sirius Black as primary guardian, Frank and Alice Longbottom as secondary, Andromeda Tonks as tertiary. He paused on that. He declared Sirius Black guilty of the Pettigrew's deaths without trial and ensured he was sent to Azkaban, which conveniently removed your primary guardian from the equation. Frank and Alice Longbottom were attacked by Death Eaters 3 weeks later and incapacitated indefinitely. Andromeda Tonks was never contacted. The fire in the room was very steady. Nobody moved. Convenient, Harry said. The word came out flat and precise, stripped of everything except its meaning. Extraordinarily so, Sharpclaw said quietly. After placing you with the Dursleys, Dumbledore had himself appointed your magical guardian under an emergency provision that technically expired after 6 months but was never challenged. Under that guardianship, he authorized access to the Potter vaults, and the Gryffindor and Peverell vaults you also inherit through the paternal line, for ongoing expenses. These expenses are documented as war reparations and Order of the Phoenix operational costs. He's been taking money from my vaults, Harry said. All this time. Approximately 12,000 galleons per year, Ragnarok said. For 8 years. Harry did the math. He looked at the number it produced. He looked at it the way you look at something that should make you feel something terrible and instead makes you feel very, very clear. And the runes, he said. What was the plan? The tracking runes, the suppression, the conditioning, what was he building? Ragnarok leaned forward. This is inference, he said. But I have been doing this for 91 years, and inference of this kind is rarely wrong. The suppression runes prevent you from becoming too powerful too fast, from coming into your inheritance in ways that would be difficult to manage. The tracking runes ensure he always knows where you are. The compulsion runes pointing toward deference and trust, he stopped. Restarted. Imagine you are a general who needs a weapon. You need the weapon to be powerful enough to win the battle, but not so powerful that it acts independently. You need it to trust you completely. You need it to walk into the battle when you point at it and say go. Harry was very still. He wants me to fight Voldemort, Harry said. We believe so, Ragnarok said. And die, maybe, Harry said. Or just, win. And be grateful to him for pointing me in the right direction. The runic architecture is consistent with a long-term management program, Rotgut said, from beside him. His voice was carefully professional, but underneath it was something that Harry had come to recognize as the goblin equivalent of barely contained fury. Not destruction. Management. He wants a Harry Potter who is powerful enough to defeat the Dark Lord, controllable enough to be directed, and too conditioned to deference to question the arrangement. Harry thought about the compulsion runes. The ones that created feelings of trust and deference toward specific individuals. The ones that suppressed the instinct to seek help or report harm. He thought about 8 years of believing that was just him. Just his personality. Just the way he was. He felt something then, finally. Not anger exactly, or not only anger. Something more architectural than that. The feeling of a building whose foundation you've just discovered is hollow, and the realization that you have to decide very quickly whether to evacuate or reinforce. The runes are coming off, Harry said. All 28. And then, he paused. What are our legal options? Sharpclaw and Ragnarok exchanged a look. Gringotts can file a formal complaint with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Sharpclaw said. Illegal runic modification of a minor, theft from protected vaults, fraudulent guardian status, obstruction of documented heir placement wishes. Each of those is individually serious. Together they're enough to destroy him, Harry said. Another silence. Potentially, Sharpclaw said carefully. If the ministry acts in good faith. And will they? Dumbledore, Ragnarok said, has significant influence within the ministry. He has cultivated that influence for decades. There will be resistance. Then we don't start with the ministry, Harry said. He was thinking as he spoke, not performing thought but actually working through it, following the logic the way he followed the logic of a problem in school, the ordinary school, the one where he was always 2 steps ahead of the lesson and careful not to show it. We start with Gringotts' own legal framework. File through your channels first. Make the documentation airtight before we go anywhere near the ministry. And in the meantime, he looked at Rotgut. Keep removing the runes. Every one that comes off is evidence of what was done, and it also means I get stronger. You're thinking several moves ahead, Ragnarok said. You told me we needed to be more powerful than him, Harry said. This is how you do that. Not just magically. Legally. Politically. On every front at once. He met the director's eyes. He's had 43 years to set up his board. We have however long it takes to remove 27 more runes. We should use the time well. There was a pause that Harry was learning to recognize as the goblin equivalent of being impressed. Yes, Ragnarok said. We should. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings were for healing. Rotgut and Ironforge worked methodically, 1 rune per session, sometimes 2 on the days Harry's recovery was faster than projected. Each removal left him with that expanding sensation, that ache of a core finding its own edges for the first time. He stopped eating like someone expecting the plate to be taken away and started eating like someone building something. Afternoons were for learning. Ragnarok had sent for a tutor, a goblin named Griphook Sr., which was apparently not the goblin's name but a title indicating expertise, who arrived on the 4th day with 17 books under his arm and the general demeanor of someone who had been waiting his entire career to teach a student worth teaching. Griphook Sr. taught Harry runic theory, because Harry had asked for it specifically. He wanted to understand what had been done to him. He wanted to understand the language of it, the mechanics, the way the runes functioned and interacted and layered. Griphook Sr., for his part, taught it the way it ought to be taught, not as a set of symbols to memorize but as a living language with its own internal logic, one that could be followed and extended and rewritten. Harry was fast. He was faster than Griphook Sr. had expected, which the tutor communicated not by saying so but by pushing harder, introducing more complex material, circling back to test whether Harry had genuinely absorbed the previous lesson or merely memorized it. Harry had genuinely absorbed it. He could feel the difference now, could feel where his own runes were, could read the foreign thread in the cloth of his own magic. It was uncomfortable, knowing, but he preferred knowing to not. This cluster, he said, on the 6th day, pointing to a section of the diagnostic matrix that Ironforge had left running at low level during the afternoon sessions at his request. The conditioning marks. They're linked to each other, aren't they? They reinforce each other. Griphook Sr. looked at the diagram and then at Harry. Explain. If one started to degrade, from a countercharm, or natural resistance, the others compensate. They're woven to share the load. Take any one out in isolation and the effect diminishes but doesn't stop. Harry traced the linkage pattern with one finger, not touching the matrix but following the lines. Rotgut is removing them in sequence based on depth, but maybe there's an order based on the linkage that would be more efficient. If you take out the central anchor first, you would destabilize the entire cluster, Griphook Sr. said slowly. Right. 1 extraction instead of 7. The tutor was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, collected his books, and said, I need to speak to Healer Rotgut. He came back an hour later with Rotgut, who looked at Harry's analysis of the linkage pattern with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression doing the not-quite-smile thing. The anchor is the deepest rune in the cluster, Rotgut said. It will require the most careful removal. But only 1 removal, Harry said. But only 1. Rotgut straightened. I'll need to adjust the approach. Give me 2 days to plan it. Take the time you need, Harry said. Do it right. I always do, Rotgut said, with something that was definitely at least a partial smile this time. On the 8th day, Harry had his first significant accidental magic event since arriving at Gringotts. It was evening. He was in his room, reading the runic history text, and he'd reached a section describing an ancient ward-breaking technique that used the same principle of anchor and cluster he'd identified in his own runes. He was thinking about it, following the thread of the idea, and the fire globe on his ceiling suddenly blazed to 3 times its normal brightness, held for 5 seconds, then settled back down. He looked up at it. It blazed again. Then dimmed. Then blazed in a slow, rhythmic pulse that, he realized after a moment, matched his breathing. He was controlling it. Not intentionally, exactly, more like his magic had found the path of least resistance and decided this was interesting. He breathed in, the light brightened. He breathed out, it dimmed. He tried breathing faster. The light kept pace. He tried stopping his breath entirely, holding still, the light held steady. Then he exhaled slowly, and deliberately thought brighter, and the light bloomed until the room was noon gold, and Harry sat in it and felt the ache in his core and the expansion and the realness of it all, and something that had been tightly wound in him for 8 years began, very carefully, to loosen. He didn't cry. It wasn't a crying moment. It was a sitting very still and breathing moment. He breathed. The light matched him. Rotgut found him still awake when he came to check in at 9 in the evening, which was apparently a practice he'd adopted without mentioning it. Harry had noticed after the 3rd night that the healer came by. The fire globe, Harry said, pointing at it. It had settled back to normal by now, but there was something different about the air in the room, a slight charge. Rotgut looked at it. What happened? I was controlling it. Accidentally, then on purpose. Harry described it. Is that normal? This quickly? After 6 suppression rune removals. Rotgut said. He sat on the stone bench near the door. We're at 61% core output, Harry. You were at 32 a week ago. The growth rate is, he stopped himself. Yes. What you experienced is normal. More will happen. You should expect it. Should I be worried about what I might do accidentally? A little caution is reasonable, Rotgut said. Panic is not. He studied the fire globe. Your control is already better than it has any right to be, for someone who's been magically suppressed since birth. I think, he paused, which was unusual enough that Harry paid close attention. I think the suppression may have had an unintended side effect. When magic can't express outward, it turns inward. Refines. The 8 years your core spent compressed may have resulted in a higher degree of intrinsic control than you'd have developed if you'd been free to express magic normally. Harry thought about that. So the suppression made me more dangerous in the long run. Potentially, yes. Rotgut's expression was dry. I doubt that was the intended outcome. Good, Harry said. The healer left, and Harry turned off the fire globe entirely. He'd worked out how, and lay in the dark and thought about Albus Dumbledore, who had laid 28 stones on a boy and called it architecture, and was somewhere out there right now, probably in his office at Hogwarts, thinking that the board was still his. Harry thought, you have no idea what's coming off the board. And he meant himself. By day 12, the rune count was down to 14. Ironforge had adopted Harry's anchor cluster theory for 2 of the conditioning rune groups, and the removals had gone exactly as predicted, single precise extractions that collapsed entire networks. She'd told him, with the matter-of-fact appreciation of a craftsperson who'd encountered good thinking, that the analysis had been not wrong. From Ironforge, Harry was learning, this was significant praise. Rotgut had begun supplementing the healing sessions with something else, what he called diagnostic awareness exercises, which were essentially a formalized version of what Harry had been doing instinctively with the fire globe. Learning to feel his own magic. Learning to find its edges. Learning to push it, gently, in specific directions. Harry was startlingly good at it. Not perfectly controlled, he melted a section of the stone table on the fourth attempt and turned Griphook Sr.'s quill into something that briefly tried to become a bird before he got hold of it, but fast. His instincts for it were almost eerie, and Rotgut watched him with the careful attention of someone updating their expectations in real time. "Has he done this before?" Ironforge asked Rotgut, when Harry was on the far side of the room and apparently examining the bookshelves. "He's had no training," Rotgut said. "That's not what I asked." Rotgut was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I don't think he's done this before. I think He watched Harry pull a book from the shelf with a gesture of his hand, not a wave or a reach but something small and specific, the book coming from 4 feet away to his hand with the obedient ease of something that wanted to be there. I think he's operating partially on instinct and partially on the runic theory he's been studying, and the two things are meshing in a way that is probably unique." "You've never seen anything like it," Ironforge said. "Not a question." "I've seen one other case," Rotgut said. "Lily Potter. When we did her magical health assessment after her first year at Hogwarts. She had a similar quality, this native fluency, as if the magic recognized her rather than the other way around." He paused. "She could do things at 12 that fully trained witches twice her age couldn't." "He's going to be extraordinary," Ironforge said. "He already is," Rotgut said. "He was always going to be. That's why someone tried so very hard to make him ordinary." On the far side of the room, Harry opened his book and began to read, apparently unaware of the conversation. But his magic, which was now 67% of its potential and growing, ran through the room like a current in deep water, present, patient, and very, very awake. On day 14, Ragnarok called a meeting that included Harry. This was the first meeting that had included Harry as a participant rather than a subject, which Harry appreciated more than he let on. Rotgut was there, Ironforge, Sharpclaw, and 2 new goblins, the head of Gringotts' legal division and the senior vault manager for the Potter accounts. The legal division head, whose name was Goldtusk, got directly to the point. "Gringotts is prepared to file a formal legal complaint with the DMLE," she said. "The documentation package is complete. Magical signature match, confirmed by 3 independent analysts. Timeline of rune placements cross-referenced with Dumbledore's known movements. Vault access records showing unauthorized use of Harry Potter's funds. Evidence of interference with legal heir placement." And, she paused. "This morning, our analysts completed an additional review. They found something we weren't looking for." "What?" Harry asked. "There were originally 29 runes," Goldtusk said. 28 are present. 1 was removed, very recently, in the past 8 years, and not by Gringotts. She set a parchment on the table. "We believe it was a rune that would have activated when you reached a specific magical threshold. A trigger rune. It was removed by the same hand that placed it, which means, he came back and adjusted the plan," Harry said. "Something changed, and he removed the trigger." "What would the trigger have done?" Goldtusk looked at Ragnarok. "Based on the residue signature," Ragnarok said carefully, "our analysts believe it was a sacrifice marker." The room was quiet. Harry looked at the table. He looked at the grain of the stone. He thought about the phrase sacrifice marker and what it meant, and did not look away from the table for a long moment. "He was going to let me die," Harry said. "Not a question. At a specific point. He set it up so that I would die at the right moment, and he recently decided to change that plan. We can't be entirely certain of the function," Goldtusk began. "But that's what you think," Harry said. A pause. "Yes," Ragnarok said. "That's what we think." Harry sat with it. He breathed steadily. He thought about a man who had looked at a 15-month-old baby in the wreckage of a house in Godric's Hollow and seen not a child but a problem to be managed and a piece to be moved. Then he said, "When do we file?" Goldtusk blinked. "We," as soon as you're ready. The documentation, file it now, Harry said. Today. While I'm still in the middle of rune removal, so there's no argument about the evidence still being present. He looked around the table. And file with the DMLE and the Wisengamot simultaneously. Don't give the ministry a chance to quietly manage it. That's an aggressive approach, Sharpclaw said. He spent 43 years being patient and careful, Harry said. I'd rather be fast. He looked at Ragnarok. Unless you see a reason not to. Ragnarok looked back at him. File today, he said to Goldtusk. The vault manager, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat. There's also the matter of the Potter accounts. With the fraudulent guardian status removed and the documentation in place, Harry is entitled to assume immediate control of his primary vault. The Gryffindor and Peveril vaults cannot be transferred until he comes of age, but they can be formally recognized as his and locked against any further access. Do it, Harry said. Lock all of them. And the funds withdrawn by Dumbledore? Can they be recovered? Some of it, if he has any recoverable assets that can be attached by Gringotts. It's a long process. Start it, Harry said. But that's secondary. The primary goal right now is making sure he knows that the board he thinks he's been playing on doesn't exist anymore. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you state the weather. Everyone in the room looked at him, Rotgut with his almost smile, Ironforge with professional appreciation, Goldtusk and the vault manager with the particular expression of people recalibrating what they're dealing with, Sharpclaw with something that looked very much like relief, and Ragnarok with that amber gaze that held too many decades to read easily. He'll retaliate, Sharpclaw said. When the filing reaches him, I know, Harry said. You're not, Sharpclaw stopped. Start it again. You're not concerned. Harry looked at him. Outside, deep in the mountain, the goldwork clinked and shifted in the vaults below, the sound of Gringotts breathing. I'm 8 years old and living inside a mountain, Harry said. I'm surrounded by people who are very good at what they do, my magic is getting stronger every day, and we have enough documentation to bury him 5 times over. He tilted his head. What exactly would he do? Come here. Sharpclaw opened his mouth, and then closed it. Nobody, Ragnarok said quietly, with the weight of 91 years behind it, comes into Gringotts uninvited. No, Harry agreed. They don't. He stood, because the meeting felt concluded, and because sitting still was becoming increasingly difficult now that his magic had something like room to exist in. The stone floor was solid under his feet. The mountain was solid around him. File it, he said. And then let's finish removing the rest of the runes, so when Dumbledore decides to respond to this, he's dealing with what I actually am. Not what he made me. He left the meeting room and walked back toward the healing corridor, and behind him the 6 goblins sat in a silence that, if you knew what to listen for, sounded a great deal like the moment before something very large and very important begins to move. Chapter 3, The Paper Trail. The owl arrived at Hogwarts on a Thursday morning, during breakfast. Dumbledore saw it come through the great hall windows with the rest of the Morning Post, a Gringotts owl, black-feathered and formal, moving with the particular purposefulness that bank owls had, no nonsense, no scenic route. It landed directly in front of him, which was unusual. Gringotts correspondence typically went to his office. This one had been addressed specifically to him, personally, at breakfast, in front of 400 students and half the staff. He recognized the deliberateness of that immediately. He took the letter. He unrolled it with the unhurried movement of a man who had been receiving difficult news for 80 years and had learned that urgency was usually a choice. He read it once. He read it again. Around him, the hall continued, orange juice and toast and the morning chatter of children who had no idea that the person at the head table had just felt the ground shift beneath 70 years of careful architecture. Minerva McGonagall, seated 2 chairs away, looked at him over her tartan-rimmed teacup. She had taught alongside him long enough to read the stillness. Albus? Nothing pressing, he said. He folded the letter into his inner pocket, smiled at a third-year Gryffindor who'd caught his eye, and resumed his breakfast with perfect composure. Internally, he was moving very fast. The letter was a formal notification of legal proceedings, Gringotts filing simultaneously with the DMLE and the Wisengamot's Legal Oversight Committee. The charges listed were specific, documented, and signed by Goldtusk herself, which meant the Goblin Nation's full institutional weight was behind it. They weren't threatening. They were informing. There was a difference, and it was important. A threat could be negotiated with. An information notice meant the wheels were already turning. He needed to think. He needed, specifically, about 3 days and several conversations that could not be had over breakfast. What he had instead was a full teaching day and a Wisengamot session scheduled for Friday that he now could not cancel without it appearing exactly as guilty as it would be. He ate his eggs. He smiled at the students. He thought, with the part of his mind that had spent 5 decades running calculations in parallel with everything else he was doing, about what Harry Potter's magical signature would look like now, with the runes beginning to come off. He thought about what happened to plans when the subject of them stopped cooperating. He thought, I need to understand exactly how much they've found. The DMLE offices occupied the 4th level of the Ministry of Magic, which was accessed via a set of lifts that always smelled faintly of parchment and the low-level anxiety of bureaucracy. Amelia Bones had worked there for 16 years. She'd been its director for 3. She knew every creak of the floors and every shortcut through the filing corridors, and she knew, when her assistant placed a package on her desk at 7:45 in the morning with the Gringotts seal still intact and the words urgent, legal proceedings stamped in red across the top, that her day had immediately become something else entirely. She read it in 40 minutes. She read it again in 30. She called her senior investigator, an unflappable woman named Proudfoot, into her office and handed it across the desk without a word. Proudfoot read it. Set it down. Said, Merlins, is this Dumbledore? According to 3 independent Gringotts runic analysts and a magical signature match that the goblins are willing to certify under oath to the Wisengamot, Amelia said, yes. Proudfoot sat in a chair she hadn't been offered without noticing she'd done it. He put 28 runes on a child. On the child, Amelia said. On Harry Potter. The same Harry Potter who's been living with muggles in, where is it, Little Whinging? Who nobody's seen since, who nobody's been allowed to see, Amelia said. His magical guardian status was granted under an emergency provision that Dumbledore had extended quietly, on paper, without anyone noticing, because, she stopped. Because he's Dumbledore, and nobody checks what Dumbledore does, because we all decided a long time ago that he's on our side. Proudfoot was very quiet. The vault access records, she said finally. 96,000 galleons over 8 years. Documented and traceable, Amelia said. Gringotts has the transaction logs. Every withdrawal. Every authorization signature. His. She pressed her fingers against the surface of her desk and thought about all the things she was going to have to do today, and the order she was going to have to do them in, and the forces that were going to push back against every single one of them. The Wisengamot filing, Proudfoot said. They'll receive this simultaneously. Already delivered. Amelia stood. We have a narrow window before the political maneuvering starts. Dumbledore has friends in the Wisengamot, significant ones. If we're going to move, we have to move before those friendships become a wall. She picked up the parchment. I want a warrant for a formal interview. Not voluntary, compelled, under Wisengamot authority. And I want it today. There will be pushback, Proudfoot said. There will be catastrophic pushback, Amelia corrected. The man is Chief Warlock. He'll claim procedural immunity. His allies will call it political. She walked to the window that looked out over the ministry atrium far below, where the golden fountain burbled and early arriving witches and wizards crossed the polished floor. That's why we need the case to be so airtight that the only argument against it is we don't want it to be true. And what if that's the argument that wins? Amelia turned from the window. She'd been in this office long enough to understand exactly how often the wrong argument won. She'd been in this country's magical law enforcement long enough to know that justice was not a guarantee. She'd also, and this was perhaps the more relevant fact, been reading the Gringotts documentation for an hour and a half, and she'd reached the section about the sacrifice rune. Then the boy who lived, she said, was being shepherded toward a second death by the man who claimed to be protecting him from the first. And if that's what this country's wizarding leadership decides to overlook, she straightened her monocle. Then they deserve to have every bit of what comes next fall directly on their heads. She sat back down and began to write the warrant. The Wisengamot session that Friday was supposed to be routine. Creature rights legislation, a zoning dispute about a dragon reserve in Wales, 2 ministerial appointments that required formal confirmation. The kind of session where half the purple-robed members sent juniors in their place and the other half spent it catching up on correspondence. By 9 in the morning on Friday, every seat was occupied. Dumbledore arrived precisely on time, in his chief warlock robes, which were different from his usual flamboyant choices, formal, authoritative, the deep purple of the Wisengamot with silver trim that caught the overhead light. He took his chair at the head of the chamber with the ease of someone who had occupied it so many times that the seat had shaped itself to him, and looked out over the assembled witches and wizards with his customary expression of benevolent attentiveness. Amelia Bones was already in the chamber, which was unusual. She had observer status but did not typically attend legislative sessions. She sat in the gallery, straight-backed, with the compelled interview warrant in a folder on her knee and Proudfoot beside her. The session was called to order. Standard procedural motions. Dumbledore moved through them with the practiced fluency of a man who had chaired this body for 30 years and could do it in his sleep. There was a quality of theater to it. Everyone in the room knew the Gringotts filing existed. The notification had gone out yesterday. The buzzing had started immediately. You could feel it in the chamber, the collective holding of breath, the wondering of who would raise it first. Dumbledore gave no sign that he felt any of it. It was Griselda Marchbanks who broke the surface. She was 98 years old, had examined Dumbledore's own OWLS back when he was a student, and had approximately zero patience for theater. Albus, she said, not through any formal channels but simply by speaking in her carrying old voice during a pause in proceedings, the Gringotts complaint. A ripple through the chamber. Several people stopped pretending to take notes. Dumbledore looked at her with warm, sad eyes. Griselda. I had hoped to address the matter at the appropriate time, she said, was before a medical healer discovered 28 illegal runes on a child, but here we are. She folded her hands. When were you going to tell us? The complaint contains significant inaccuracies. The complaint contains a magical signature match certified by 3 Gringotts analysts, said another voice, Tiberius Ogden, from the left side of the chamber, who had been friends with Dumbledore for 40 years and looked like he'd bitten into something he couldn't swallow. Are you saying the goblins fabricated the signature? I'm saying, Dumbledore said, and his voice was still measured, still warm, still the voice of the most trusted man in wizarding Britain, that the situation is considerably more complex than the complaint suggests, and that there are aspects of Harry Potter's situation that require difficult decisions made in the interest of, you put runes on a 1-year-old, Griselda said. She said it very plainly. Begin with that. The chamber went still in the way that only happens when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Dumbledore was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, I made choices designed to protect Harry Potter. Every decision I made was in the service of his safety and the safety of wizarding Britain. You suppressed his magic, Ogden said. To prevent him from becoming a target before he was old enough to protect himself. You tracked him. To ensure I could reach him immediately if there was a threat. You conditioned his emotional responses, Ogden said, and his voice cracked slightly on it, the voice of someone trying very hard to follow this wherever it led regardless of what it cost him. You engineered what he feels. You built a person, Albus. I shaped circumstances, Dumbledore said. As I have always done. As I have done my entire career in service of the greater, don't, Griselda said sharply. Don't tell me about the greater good. I've been in this chair long enough to know that phrase is where conscience goes to die. She looked at him with her century-old eyes. You had no right. Dumbledore's expression did something then, very briefly, just a flicker, that Amelia Bones, watching from the gallery, filed away because she had spent 16 years reading people in exactly these kinds of rooms. The flicker was not guilt. It was not remorse. It was something that looked more like the frustration of an extraordinarily patient person confronting the first serious obstacle to a plan they believed in completely. He still thought he was right. That was the part that made her cold. Chief Warlock Dumbledore, she said, rising from the gallery. Heads turned. I have a warrant here for your formal interview regarding the Gringotts complaint. It is compelled under Wizengamot authority and endorsed by the Legal Oversight Committee. She held up the folder. I would appreciate your cooperation. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Of course, he said. I have nothing to hide. Several people in the chamber looked at each other. Nobody said the thing everyone was thinking, which was that people with nothing to hide did not typically spend 43 years hiding it. The interview room was in the DMLE offices, 3 levels below the Wizengamot chamber. It was designed for exactly this purpose, functional, slightly uncomfortable, with a recording quill that never needed to be wound and a charm that prevented any magic not approved by the presiding officer. Dumbledore sat across the table from Amelia Bones with his hands folded and his expression set to something that managed to communicate both full cooperation and quiet sorrow about the whole situation. Amelia had her notes. She had Gringotts' documentation. She had Proudfoot beside her and the recording quill running. She started with the financial records, because she'd found in 16 years that finance was often where the real architecture of a crime lived, not in dramatic gestures but in the accumulation of small deliberate choices. She walked through every withdrawal from the Potter vaults, every authorization, every categorization of funds as legitimate estate expense. Dumbledore answered everything. He was, she noted, extraordinarily good at answering questions. He'd had decades of practice at it. His answers were not lies, precisely, they were reframings. Each withdrawal existed in a context he supplied, each context was presented as obviously reasonable given the circumstances, and the circumstances were always described in terms of Harry Potter's safety and the threat of Voldemort's return. The tracking runes, she said, after 40 minutes of financials. 7 of them. Continuously broadcasting his location. To ensure I could monitor any magical threat approaching him, Dumbledore said. To ensure you could monitor his location, she said. Which is the same thing, given, to ensure you personally always knew where he was, she said. Not raising her voice. Just stripping the reframing out and leaving the simple fact. Not the Auror office. Not the DMLE. Not any official body. You. A pause. I was his guardian, Dumbledore said. Under a provisional status that expired in March of 1982, Amelia said. At which point you renewed it yourself, using an administrative instrument that hadn't been used in 40 years, with a single ministry official's signature, an official who, I've discovered, was a former student of yours and who has since been promoted 3 times to positions with direct relevance to matters concerning Harry Potter. She let that sit. That's not guardianship. That's a private surveillance network. Dumbledore looked at her. She had the impression, not for the first time in her career, of being seen by someone who was also calculating. Amelia, he said, gently. I understand how this looks. But you must understand what we're dealing with. Tom Riddle, Voldemort, is not gone. He is diminished, but he will return. When he does, Harry Potter is the only, don't, she said. The same word Griselda had used. She'd seen the transcript of the chamber session already, and she thought Griselda had chosen correctly. Don't make this about him. This is about you, and what you did to a child. What I did was prepare, you suppressed a child's magic for 8 years, she said. He is currently at Gringotts undergoing rune removal. The healers report that his core output at the time of discovery was 32% of its natural potential. 32. You took a child who should have been one of the most magically capable individuals of his generation and you filed him down to a manageable size. She leaned forward slightly. And you know what the most extraordinary thing is? Even at 32%, suppressed and conditioned and tracked, he sat in a room with Director Ragnarok after one afternoon and started asking the right questions. Imagine what he would have been without you. Dumbledore was very still. He needs to be ready, he said, and for the first time the certainty in his voice had something raw underneath it. You don't understand what Voldemort is capable of. I was an Auror for 9 years during the war, she said flatly. I understand exactly what he's capable of. That understanding did not lead me to put 28 runes on a child. She straightened. We're done for today. You'll receive notification of the formal charges within 48 hours. She stood. For what it's worth, Albus, I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a certain kind of dangerous that only very intelligent people can be. The kind that is utterly convinced of its own righteousness. She walked out. Proudfoot followed. Dumbledore sat alone in the interview room for a few minutes before his escort came to take him out. He sat there and thought about Harry Potter and Gringotts, with runes coming off and magic expanding. He thought about 32% becoming 60, 70, whatever it was now. He thought about the questions the boy had apparently been asking on his first night there, and the legal strategy the goblins had executed with a precision that told him Harry wasn't just present for it but helping to drive it. He thought about all the careful work of 8 years unraveling in 2 weeks. He thought, I need to speak with him. He sent a letter the following morning. It arrived at Gringotts addressed to Harry Potter, on Hogwarts stationery, in Dumbledore's flowing script. The envelope passed through the Gringotts mail screening, standard procedure for all external correspondence to residents, and was held for 20 minutes while the screening charm worked, checking for hexes, compulsion charms, poisons, and 17 other categories of magical threat. It came back clean, which Sharpclaw noted with a slight frown because he'd been hoping for something he could add to the legal file. Harry opened it in his room, sitting at his desk. My dear Harry, I imagine these past weeks have been difficult and confusing, and I want you to know that I am thinking of you with great care. There are things that have been revealed that I should have explained to you long ago, in the appropriate context and with the proper preparation. I would very much like to speak with you, if you are willing. I believe that when you understand the full picture, the dangers that surround you, the nature of the threat that cost you your parents, and the reasons behind every decision I have made, you will understand that everything was done in love and in your protection. I would like to visit Gringotts at your convenience. I ask only for the chance to explain. With great affection and sincere hope, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. He set it down on the desk. He looked at the fire globe on his ceiling, which was burning steady and warm at exactly the level he preferred. He thought about the phrase done in love. He thought about the compulsion runes that had been removed from his core, the ones that had created predispositions toward trust and deference toward specific individuals. He thought about the fact that he was, apparently, supposed to be feeling a warm glow of trust and deference right now and instead felt only the clear, cold air of his own unmediated judgment. He picked up a quill. He wrote his response in the careful handwriting he'd been practicing because the tutors at his Muggle school had never taught him properly and Griphook Sr. had expressed views about illegible work that Harry respected. Mr. Dumbledore, thank you for writing. I've read your letter carefully. I'm going to decline your visit. Not because I'm not interested in what you have to say, but because I think the appropriate place for your explanation is the Wisengamot's formal hearing, where it will be recorded and where the people responsible for deciding what to do with it will be present. I'd also gently note that the runes responsible for any feelings of trust and deference toward you have been removed. I want you to know that so that when we do eventually speak, neither of us is confused about what I'm actually feeling. Harry Potter. He looked at the letter. Added one line at the bottom. P.S. You should know that I've been studying runic theory. The cluster architecture and the conditioning marks was genuinely sophisticated. It was still wrong. He gave it to Rotgut to send, because he'd found that watching Rotgut send his correspondence was consistently satisfying. The response arrived 3 days later. Not from Dumbledore, from his solicitor, which told Harry something significant about how the old man was reading the situation. The solicitor's letter was dense with legal terminology and essentially argued that the Gringotts filing contained procedural errors that rendered it invalid. Harry brought it to Goldtusk, who read it, made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and said, "He's arguing that the Inheritance Verification Act doesn't confer standing on Gringotts to file criminal complaints on behalf of the assessed party." "Does it?" Harry asked. "Not explicitly," Goldtusk said. "But the Act confers full medical custody, and full medical custody under wizarding law carries the same legal standing as guardian status, which absolutely does confer standing." She set the letter down. "He's fishing for procedural dismissal before the substantive charges can be heard. He wants this thrown out on a technicality. Can he get it thrown out?" Goldtusk looked at him over the parchment. "He's Chief Warlock. He has allies on the Legal Oversight Committee. It's possible he could delay a hearing significantly, even if he can't dismiss outright." She tapped one long finger on the letter. "We need to remove the procedural argument." "How?" "The simplest way," she said, "is if the complainant is not Gringotts on your behalf, but you yourself. I'm 8 years old. Heirs of noble houses have legal standing in the Wizengamot independent of age," she said. "You hold the Potter seat, the Gryffindor seat, and the Peverell seat. That's 3 seats, Harry. Under wizarding law, a 3-seat heir has full legal personality regardless of age. They can file complaints, make statements, claim their seats, and compel proceedings." Harry looked at her for a long moment. "He didn't tell me any of this," Harry said. "Of course he didn't. The compulsion runes wouldn't have prevented you from learning it," Goldtusk said carefully. "But the conditioning marks, the ones that suppressed self-advocacy, self-preservation, the impulse to seek legal resources, those would have made it very unlikely that you'd have thought to look." "He covered all his angles," Harry said. "He tried to," she said. "How do you want to proceed?" Harry straightened. He was still small for his age. The nutritional deficiency that Iron Forge had been quietly correcting over the past 2 weeks hadn't fully shown its effects yet. But there was something in how he held himself that had nothing to do with size. "I want to claim my seats," he said. "Formally. At the next Wizengamot session. And I want to file my own complaint alongside Gringotts, separate, personal, and very specific." He paused. "Can we do it before the procedural motion is heard?" Goldtusk's expression was the closest thing to delight Harry had seen on a goblin's face. "The next session is Tuesday," she said. "If we move tonight, yes." "Then we move tonight," Harry said. Ragnarok found him in the runic study room at 10 that evening, still working. The fire globes were burning high because Harry hadn't consciously adjusted them, and 3 books were opened simultaneously on the table in front of him. He was writing notes that connected concepts across all 3, his quill moving fast, the handwriting precise and sharp. "You should sleep," the director said. "After this." Harry didn't look up. "The Peverell seat. It predates the Wizengamot by 3 centuries. Does that give it different procedural standing than the Potter or Gryffindor seats?" Ragnarok was quiet for a moment, apparently recalculating something about the evening he'd expected to have. He pulled out the chair across from Harry and sat. "Yes," he said. "The Peverell seat carries founder's standing. It cannot be voted down procedurally. If you claim it, your right to address the chamber is absolute. They cannot silence you even if they hold a majority against you." Harry wrote something down. "And if I claim all 3 simultaneously? Then you have 3 separate grounds for addressing the chamber, all of which supersede normal procedural rules." Ragnarok studied him. "You're not going to let the solicitor's procedural move work. He wants to keep this quiet, in committee rooms, where his allies can manage the narrative," Harry said. He set down the quill. "I want it in the full chamber, on record, in front of everyone. He met Ragnar's eyes. He spent 43 years working in private. I want everything that happens next to happen in the light. Ragnar was quiet. He had the expression Harry had come to associate with the director being genuinely, unexpectedly moved by something and refusing to show it fully. Tuesday, Ragnar said. Tuesday, Harry agreed. The rune removal will be complete by Monday, the director said. Rotgut confirmed this afternoon. You'll be at full capacity. Good, Harry said. And then, because he'd been thinking about it since Rotgut told him, what does full capacity feel like? For someone like me? Ragnar looked at him steadily. I don't know, the director said, honestly. No one does yet. Your mother's records and your father's inheritance history suggest something extraordinary. The 8 years of compression, he paused. Rotgut thinks it may have created a degree of control that is essentially unprecedented in someone your age. So we find out Tuesday, Harry said. We find out Monday, Ragnar said. When the last rune comes off. Tuesday is when the rest of the world finds out. Harry thought about that. He thought about a chamber full of witches and wizards in purple robes who had decided, collectively and individually, that Albus Dumbledore was someone whose judgment could be trusted without question. He thought about what happened when a decision like that met evidence that couldn't be wished away. He thought about walking into that chamber as himself, finally, completely, without any borrowed limitations. Good, he said again. He went back to his notes. Ragnar sat across from him in the fire globe light for a few minutes before leaving him to it, and as he walked back through the stone corridors of Gringotts, he thought that he had been in this mountain for 91 years and had seen many things, and that the next week was going to be one of the most interesting of them. He was not, as it turned out, wrong about that. Chapter 4, The Shape of Fire. The last rune came off on a Monday, just after dawn. Rotgut had scheduled it for mid-morning, but Harry had been awake since 4, lying in the dark with his hands flat on his chest, feeling the 27th removal's aftermath still settling through him like the tail end of a storm. The expansion after that one had been the most dramatic yet. He'd accidentally pulled every fire globe in the residential corridor to full brightness simultaneously, and 3 doors down a goblin accountant had woken up furious and confused. Harry had apologized through the wall. The accountant had said something in gobbledygook that Rotgut later translated as approximately "You owe me 2 hours of sleep, boy," which Harry thought was entirely fair. He lay in the dark and felt what he was now. Not fully, the 28th rune was still there, the deepest one, the first one placed, which Rotgut had been approaching with the care of a surgeon working next to something vital. But the 27 removals had changed the landscape of him so comprehensively that he barely recognized the before when he thought about it. 67% had become 78, then 83, then last Thursday it had hit 91 and Iron Forge had made a sound that wasn't quite a word and written 3 things down in rapid succession. He reached for the fire globe above his bed without raising his hand. Just reached, the way you reach for something that's part of you. The light came on at the exact level he wanted, no more, no less. He'd been doing things like that for 5 days. Small things, precise things. He'd found that his magic didn't have the ragged, effortful quality he'd read about in magical theory texts, the thing most wizards described as pulling or pushing, the effort of will that spellwork required. For him it was more like pointing. Like the magic already knew what he meant and was waiting for him to be specific. He'd asked Griphook Sr. about it. Your course spent 8 years refining itself in a compressed space, the tutor had said, with the particular satisfaction of someone watching their theory prove out. What would have expressed as raw power instead deepened into precision. You're not generating more than other witches and wizards, broadly speaking, you're wasting almost none of it. He'd tapped the desk. Most magic is inefficient. The gap between intent and result is where the effort lives. Your gap is, very narrow. Is that why it feels like pointing? Harry asked. Griphook Sr. had looked at him. Yes. That is exactly why. Now Harry lay in the pre-dawn quiet and pointed at the ceiling and wrote his name in light, briefly, just the letters, and then let it fade. He was ready. They brought him down to the healing room at 6 because he'd asked Rotgut to move the session earlier, and Rotgut had looked at him for a moment and then simply changed the schedule. Ironforge was there, which she hadn't been for the past several sessions. She'd been monitoring from her own office and trusting Rotgut to handle the final stages. The fact that she was here now, in person, for the last one, told Harry something. Nervous? Rotgut asked, as Harry settled onto the examination table. No, Harry said. Then, because Rotgut had specifically asked him on the first day to tell the difference between handling pain and pretending it wasn't there, a little. Not about the removal. About what comes after. Tomorrow, Rotgut said. Tomorrow, Harry confirmed. Ironforge was already running the diagnostic matrix. It filled the room with its cool surgical light, and Harry could see, he'd learned to see it over 2 weeks of sessions, the shape of his own core displayed in it, the vast warm architecture of it, and there at the very center, like a keystone, the last rune. The oldest one. The first thing Dumbledore had ever laid on him, probably minutes after placing him on a doorstep in Godric's Hollow. It was the size of a shilling in the display. In his core it was the size of a continent. This one, Rotgut said, beside him, is going to feel different from the others. The others were additions, foreign thread in the cloth, as I said. This one has been there long enough that your core has grown partially around it. It's not the cloth. It's become part of the loom. Meaning it'll hurt more, Harry said. Meaning it'll feel like a loss, initially, Rotgut said. Even though it shouldn't be there. Even though it's caused you harm. The core doesn't differentiate between native and foreign after enough time, it just knows what it's used to. He met Harry's eyes. Are you ready? Harry breathed in. He looked at the last rune in the display, the cold, formal geometric shape of it, sharp-edged and deliberate, placed by hands that thought they had the right to arrange a child's soul. Do it, he said. The numbing matrix went up. The room went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that meant several important things were being done very carefully. Harry stared at the ceiling and breathed and felt Rotgut and Ironforge working, pressure and movement and a deep interior vibration that wasn't pain but was adjacent to it, the way a very low sound is adjacent to a feeling. Then, 7 minutes in, something shifted. It was, Harry didn't have words for it immediately. It was like the moment when you've been holding a weight for so long your arm has gone numb from it, and someone takes the weight away, and for just a moment the absence of it is more disorienting than the weight was. He felt his core lurch, search, find the empty space where the anchor had lived for 8 years, and then fill it. Fill it with himself. The fire globes in the healing room went incandescent. The diagnostic matrix blazed white, washing out its own display, and both healers stepped back instinctively. The stone of the walls, ancient mountain stone, old and dense and not given to theatrics, hummed at a frequency Harry could feel in his back teeth. A wind came from nowhere, circular, warm, moving his hair against his face. It lasted 11 seconds. Then it stopped. The fire globes settled. The matrix recalibrated. The stone went quiet. Harry sat up on the examination table and looked at his hands. They were the same hands. Same small knuckles, same bitten nails, same faint scar on the right thumb from a kitchen accident at the Dursleys 3 years ago. Same hands exactly. The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago. Not because it had changed, but because he had, and the room hadn't caught up yet. Harry, Ironforge said. Her voice was measured, but something underneath it was working at staying that way. How do you feel? He looked up. Like myself, he said. For the first time. She looked at the diagnostic matrix display. Then at Rotgut. Then back at the display. She wrote something down. What is it? Harry asked. Core output, she said. It's stabilizing. She watched the display for another moment. 112% of projected baseline. Harry frowned. That's more than 100%. The projected baseline was based on inherited potential, she said. Your actual capacity has exceeded the projection. She set her quill down. The compression theory holds. 8 years of refined internal development have produced a core that is not merely restored to its natural state but augmented beyond what it would have been without the suppression. She said it very precisely, the way she said everything, but there was no disguising what the statement meant. Dumbledore had tried to make Harry Potter smaller. He had made him larger instead. Ragnarok was waiting in the corridor outside the healing room. Harry hadn't expected that. The director did not, as a rule, wait in corridors. He stood with his hands folded behind his back, and when Harry came out he looked at him with those deep amber eyes that held too much to read, and said nothing for a moment. Well? Harry said. You pulled the ambient magic in this section of the mountain for approximately 9 seconds, Ragnarok said. 4 levels felt it. My office door opened on its own. Sorry, Harry said. Don't be, Ragnarok said. Come. You need to eat, and then Griphook Sr. wants to begin the combat applications work, and you have the Wisengamot preparation this afternoon. He was already walking. We have 14 hours before Tuesday. You could say good morning, Harry said, falling into step beside him. Good morning, Ragnarok said, without inflection. You've exceeded your projected core baseline by 12%. It is, objectively, an excellent morning. Griphook Sr. was waiting in the training room, a space Harry hadn't seen before, 2 levels below the healing room, that was cut from the deepest part of the mountain. The stone here was different, darker, older, veined with something metallite that caught magic and held it, so the room had an ambient field that training spells could interact with. The floor had a faint grid pattern carved into it, very old, worn but still precise. The tutor was standing in the center with a staff across his shoulders, not a weapon, Harry thought, just a prop for demonstrating posture, and he looked at Harry with the sharp assessment he used for everything. No wand, he said. It was an observation, not a question. I haven't had one, Harry said. Everything I've been doing, has been wandless. Yes. I know. Griphook Sr. set the staff aside. You need to understand something about the goblin approach to magic, because it's relevant to how you're going to train. Goblins don't use wands. We never have. The wand is a focusing tool, it standardizes and amplifies, but it also restricts. It channels magic through a predetermined conductor. He met Harry's eyes. What you're doing when you work without one is fundamentally different. You're not channeling. You're directing. The precision is yours, not the instrument's. Rotgut said something similar, Harry said. That the gap between intent and result is narrow for me. Narrow and getting narrower, Griphook Sr. said. Which is why I'm not going to teach you to use a wand today. I'm going to teach you goblin combat principles, which are about economy of force and absolute precision, and which will work better with your current method than any traditional wizard dueling would. He picked up the staff again. Stand here. Harry stood where he was pointed. Attack me, Griphook Sr. said. Harry looked at him. You want me to, attack me, the tutor repeated. Whatever comes naturally. I want to see what you default to. Harry thought about it for half a second. Then he pushed, a flat wave of force, not heat or light but kinetic, the kind of thing that happened when a suppressed 8-year-old accidentally blew the covers off his bed or sent Dudley's friend stumbling backward on the street. Except now it wasn't accidental and it wasn't a wave, it was a specific, concentrated thrust at Griphook Sr.'s center of gravity, designed to knock him back without hurting him. Griphook Sr. moved sideways with a footwork that was more like water than walking and let it pass. He was watching Harry's hands. Again, he said. Different. Harry tried heat this time, a focused point of warmth at the tutor's left shoulder, uncomfortable rather than damaging. Griphook Sr. blocked it with a flat-handed gesture that scattered the heat sideways. You're thinking about what to use, the tutor said. Stop. What does your magic want to do? Harry stopped thinking about it. What happened next was quieter than he expected. A fine, tight net of what he could only describe as pressure, not force in one direction but inward from multiple angles simultaneously, a sphere of it around the tutor's feet and lower legs. Griphook Sr. hit it, stumbled, and actually had to catch himself on the staff. He looked at Harry. "That," he said, "is not in any human dueling textbook I have ever read." "I didn't know what it was," Harry said honestly. "It's a containment press. Ancient goblin battlefield technique. It requires 3 practitioners working in concert to achieve half that quality." The tutor straightened, and his expression was doing something that, after 2 weeks, Harry had learned to read as close to excitement. "You've just invented it independently, at 8 years old, on your first attempt." He tapped the staff on the floor. "We are going to have a very productive morning." They worked for 3 hours. Not in the way Harry had read about magical training, the repetition of incantations, the prescribed wand movements, the structured ladder of increasingly advanced spells. This was rougher than that, more physical, more conversational. Griphook Sr. would demonstrate a principle of force direction and Harry would immediately try to replicate it without wand or words, usually succeeding on the second or third attempt, sometimes the first. When he failed interestingly. The magic went somewhere adjacent to where he meant it, close enough that the correction was obvious. By the end of the 3rd hour, Harry had produced, among other things, a shield that actively repelled rather than simply blocked, a tracking charm that required no target in sight, just the memory of a specific individual's magical signature, and something that Griphook Sr. described with visible satisfaction as a suppression pulse, which you have used on yourself for 8 years in reverse, courtesy of 28 runes you did not consent to. "Can I unsuppress someone?" Harry asked, meaning it as a technical question about the mechanism. "Theoretically," Griphook Sr. said. "Given sufficient understanding of the blocking architecture and sufficient core strength." "Why?" Harry thought about Sirius Black, rotting in Azkaban for a crime he apparently hadn't committed. He thought about Frank and Alice Longbottom. He thought about Andromeda Tonks who'd never been contacted. "No particular reason," he said. "Just curious about the limits." Griphook Sr. looked at him for a moment, clearly not believing this, and equally clearly deciding not to push it. "Rest," he said. "You have Wizengamot preparation this afternoon. Come back in a week, we'll work on precision at range." Harry looked around the training room, the old grid on the floor, the magic-dense stone, the way the ambient field had bent itself slightly around him during the session as if adjusting to a new presence. "Can I use this room on my own?" he asked. "After supervised sessions establish baseline safety protocols," Griphook Sr. said. "Which I will approve." He looked at the slight dent in the training room wall where Harry's first containment press had gone slightly wide. "After you demonstrate adequate directional control." 3 days, Harry said. "A week," Griphook Sr. said. "Possibly 5 days." Sharpclaw ran the Wizengamot preparation with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the next morning was the most important legal proceeding Gringotts have been involved in for 30 years. They sat in the conference room, Harry, Sharpclaw, Goldtusk, and a newly arrived advisor named Flintlock who specialized specifically in Wizengamot procedure and had apparently been retained precisely because the procedural landscape of the next morning was complex enough to warrant specialist expertise. "The session opens at 9, Flintlock said. She was precise in the way of people who had spent their entire careers in rooms where precision was the difference between winning and losing. "Normal order of business for the first 30 minutes. You'll file your seat claims before the session formally opens. We do this via the registration clerk, who cannot refuse a valid claim from a documented heir. Once the claims are registered, you exist in the chamber as a legal participant regardless of what anyone else wants." "Can they challenge the claims?" Harry asked. "On grounds of age or capacity," Flintlock said. "But your capacity is vouched for by Gringotts medical certification, and your age is irrelevant under the 3-seat provision. Any challenge will fail." She paused. What Dumbledore's allies will try instead is to defer the formal hearing of your personal complaint to a subcommittee. They'll argue it's too complex for full chamber, requires specialist legal review, etc. How do we stop that? You address the chamber before they can make the motion, Goldtusk said. Under founders standing from the Peveril seat, you have the right to a statement before any procedural motions are entertained. You speak first. You speak publicly. Then whatever motion they make happens after the full chamber has heard you. What should I say? Harry asked. The truth, Sharpclaw said. Simply. In your own words. He looked at Harry steadily. You are not a lawyer and you are not a politician. The chamber will expect performance, this is a space where performance lives. Don't give it to them. Be what you are. What am I? Harry asked, not rhetorically. An 8-year-old boy, Sharpclaw said, who was systematically controlled and robbed by the most powerful man in their world, and who has the documentation to prove every word of it. He folded his hands. That is extraordinarily sufficient. They worked on structure, not a speech. Harry resisted that, but an order of information. What to establish first, what to present second, where the documentation existed to back every claim, how to respond if he was interrupted. Harry absorbed it quickly, asked sharp questions, and pushed back twice on points where he thought the framing was too legalistic and would lose the chamber's emotional attention. Flintlock noted both pushbacks and adjusted. She did it without comment, which Harry took as the highest compliment the proceeding specialist was capable of giving. At 6 p.m, Sharpclaw called it. You're ready, he said. What time should I be up? Harry asked. 6:30, Flintlock said. We leave for the ministry at 7:45. Dress? Harry asked. There was a pause. Harry looked down at himself. He'd been wearing Gringotts provided clothing for 2 weeks, well-fitted, plain, practical, because his backpack hadn't contained anything appropriate for a Wisengamot session and nobody had specifically addressed the fact. Right, Sharpclaw said, standing. That I should have organized yesterday. My apologies. It's fine, Harry said. Something plain would be better than something formal. I don't want to look like I'm performing either. Goldtusk made a sound. What? Harry said. Nothing, she said. I'll have something appropriate sent to your room. That night, Harry couldn't sleep until nearly midnight. Not from anxiety, or not primarily. He lay in the dark and thought about the day and its pieces, the last rune, the training room, the preparation session, the dress question at the end which had made Goldtusk make that sound, as if the fact that he'd thought about what he looked like in terms of what it communicated rather than how it felt was surprising. He thought about Dumbledore. He'd been careful not to think about Dumbledore too directly since the morning the name came back on the runic analysis report. He thought around him, through him, in terms of what needed to be done and what documents existed and what legal mechanisms were available. That was the useful thinking. The other kind, the direct kind, the kind that asked how and why with genuine confusion rather than strategic purpose, he'd been keeping at a distance. Now, in the quiet, he let it come a little closer. He thought about a man who had been a hero. He knew the outline of Dumbledore from the same fragmentary sources he knew everything about the wizarding world, the Jumble Sale book, the overheard conversations, the one-time Hagrid, a huge, warm, accidental figure he remembered vaguely, had told him, in the few minutes before Petunia's face shut the conversation down, that his parents had been brave and that the bad man was gone and that Harry should know he was famous in a whole world he didn't live in yet. He'd heard Dumbledore's name connected to good things, always. Safety. Victory. Light on the right side of a dark war. He thought about what it must have taken. Not to place the runes, that part was clearly monstrous and Harry wasn't going to waste time dressing it up. But the decision. The moment a man who had beaten back darkness, who had watched people die, who had perhaps lost enough to make him afraid in a very specific way, the moment that man looked at a child and thought I cannot afford to let you be free. What kind of fear created that decision? Harry didn't find sympathy in it. But he found something adjacent to understanding, which was different, understanding the mechanism without approving of it. He'd read enough history in the past 2 weeks to know that the most dangerous decisions were usually made by people who believed completely in their own necessity. He thought, tomorrow, I'm going to make it very clear what you cost me. Not with anger. Just with facts. Then he turned on his side and fell asleep. Someone tried to kill him at 4 a.m. He woke from a dead sleep with every nerve lit up, his magic already casting outward before he was consciously awake, a threat response that he hadn't known he had until the first suppression rune came off and his instinct stopped being smothered. He rolled off the bed and onto the floor in the same movement, and the thing that had been directed at him from the window, a targeted curse of some kind, dark and fast and precisely aimed at where his sleeping head had been, hit the stone wall and left a scorch mark the shape of a pressed hand. Harry stood in the middle of his room. His heart was going fast. He breathed through it. The window was sealed, Gringotts residential security, specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of attack. But something had come through anyway, which meant either the security had been circumvented or the attack had originated from inside the mountain. He reached out with his magic the way Griphook Sr. had taught him, not searching with his eyes but with the tracking sense, following the magical residue of what had been cast. He had the caster's signature now, the way the spell felt, not the shape of it but the handwriting underneath, the same way all rune work carried its creator's fingerprint. He followed it. Down the corridor. 3 levels. Not Dumbledore's signature, he'd have recognized that immediately. Someone else. Someone who'd been in the mountain recently, whose signature was in the ambient field of the last few days. Harry pulled on clothes, the Gringotts provided ones, plain and dark, and went into the corridor. He didn't go looking for an auror or a guard. He followed the trace. 2 levels down, in a maintenance corridor that ran alongside the cart tracks, he found a wizard, an adult, middle-aged, Wizengamot robes hastily concealed under a travel cloak, backed against the wall with his wand raised, and the expression of someone who had not expected his target to come to him. Harry stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the man. Recognized him, from the files Sharpclaw had shown him, the roster of Dumbledore's significant Wizengamot allies. Corvin Selwyn. Old family. Conservative. 5 votes he controlled personally through family influence. You're one of his, Harry said. It wasn't an accusation. Just an identification. Selwyn's wand hand was shaking slightly. You're 8 years old, he said, as if this was information that should resolve the situation. And you tried to kill me while I was asleep, Harry said. So we can probably agree the normal rules aren't applying. He tilted his head. How did you get through residential security? Selwyn didn't answer. His wand was still raised, but he wasn't casting, which was interesting. Either he'd reconsidered, or he'd expected a frightened child and wasn't sure what to do with whatever Harry was instead. Who sent you? Harry asked. I don't know what you're wearing Wizengamot robes under that cloak, Harry said, which means you've come from a preparation meeting, which means tonight, before tomorrow's session. Dumbledore is managing his allies. He kept his hands at his sides. His magic was doing the thing it did now, available, patient, waiting for him to be specific. He doesn't want me to make it to that chamber tomorrow. Which means he's more worried about tomorrow than he's letting on. He paused. Put the wand down. I'll put it down, Harry said. Not louder. Just more. The wand lowered 3 inches without Selwyn visibly deciding to lower it. He looked at his own hand with an expression of faint confusion. Harry hadn't done that intentionally. Or, he had, sort of, in the same way that pointing at the fire globe was intentional. He'd just meant it. And his magic had followed. Gringotts security is going to arrive in about 90 seconds, Harry said. They do rounds on this corridor every 4 minutes and you've been standing here for 2.5. He'd worked out the security patterns in his first week. When they arrive, you are going to tell them everything. Who sent you, how you got through the security, what the plan was for tonight. He met the man's eyes. Or I explain it, and you have considerably less room to negotiate. Selwyn looked at him. His wand hand was all the way down now. His face had the grey quality of someone whose evening had arrived at a destination very different from where they thought they were going. He said you'd be. Selwyn stopped. What? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Compliant, Selwyn said, with a bitterness that wasn't aimed at Harry but at the information he'd been given. He said you were a frightened child. I was, Harry said. Before 2 weeks ago. He heard footsteps, goblin security, quick and quiet. I'd start talking. Ragnarok was in the interrogation corridor by 4:45, in robes that suggested he'd been awake when the alert came rather than dragged from sleep. He looked at Harry, who was standing outside the room where Selwyn was being interviewed by 2 Gringotts security chiefs, with an expression that went through several things quickly. You're uninjured, Ragnarok said. The curse hit the wall, Harry said. I was already moving. How did you know? I woke up, Harry said. My magic woke up before I did. And then I followed the signature. He told it simply. Ragnarok listened with his hands behind his back and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was processing something that required significant recalibration. He's Corvin Selwyn. He's a Wisengamot member. He'll have information about however he got through the residential security. We're already working on that, Ragnarok said. Our security shouldn't have. He stopped himself. We will address the failure. Tonight. Don't blame the security team, Harry said. This was sophisticated. And it tells us something useful. Ragnarok looked at him. Dumbledore is scared, Harry said. He wouldn't risk this if he wasn't. He's had 43 years of careful, patient manipulation, and he just sent a man to kill an 8-year-old in the middle of the night because tomorrow is coming and he can't control it. He looked at the closed door of the interrogation room. That's a mistake. He's making mistakes now. The director was quiet for a long moment. You should go back to sleep, he said. The scorch mark on my wall is probably keeping me awake, Harry said. I'll have a room moved, Ragnarok said. It's fine, Harry said. I'll sleep. There are a few hours yet. He started back toward the residential corridor. Wake me at 6:30. And can someone fix the window? He heard Ragnarok behind him, speaking to someone in rapid gobbledygook. He went back to his room, looked at the scorch mark on the wall, the pressed hand shape of a killing curse, and made a decision not to feel afraid of it. Not because fear was wrong, but because fear wasn't useful right now and there was a direct alternative available. He looked at it the way he looked at everything that had been done to him without his consent. He looked at it, and named it, and let it make him clearer. Then he lay down on the bed in his clothes and slept for 2 more hours, steady and uninterrupted, while the mountain breathed around him and the goblins worked through the night to understand exactly how Corvin Selwyn had gotten inside their walls. By morning they had the answer. By morning, they had a second charge for the filing. By morning, Harry was already dressed and waiting in the corridor when Ragnarok's knock came, precisely at 6:30. Ready? The director asked. Since 4 in the morning, Harry said. Ragnarok made the not quite laugh sound. They went to face Tuesday. Chapter 5, The board flipped. The Ministry of Magic smelled like parchment and old decisions. Harry noticed it the moment they stepped out of the flue in the atrium, a vast, echoing space with a ceiling that showed a sky it didn't have, turquoise and gold and aggressively cheerful. The fountain in the center was golden figures he didn't know yet, a wizard and witch and assorted magical creatures arranged in a hierarchy that said something unflattering about whoever had commissioned it. The floor was polished black tile that reflected everything, and the early morning foot traffic moved across it with the practiced purposefulness of people who had somewhere important to be and needed you to know it. Harry walked through it and people looked at him. He looked back. He was with Ragnarok on his left and Goldtusk on his right, with Sharpclaw and Flintlock behind, and the 5 of them moved through the atrium in a formation that was not aggressive but was absolutely not decorative either. Several witches and wizards stopped mid-step. One dropped her coffee. The whisper started at the fountain and moved outward like a stone dropped in water. Is that? Can't be, he's a child, that's Harry Potter, and Harry walked through the middle of it with his hands at his sides and his chin level. He was wearing what Goldtusk had sent to his room the night before, dark trousers, a deep blue shirt, a plain black jacket that fit correctly, which was still a novelty. No house colors, no emblems, nothing that announced allegiance to any existing faction. Just a boy in clothes that fit. The scar on his forehead was visible. He hadn't tried to cover it. The lift to the Wizengamot chamber was on the far side of the atrium. They crossed the full length of the floor to reach it, which Harry suspected Flintlock had arranged deliberately. She had the procedural instincts of someone who understood that arrival was the first statement you made. "You're handling the attention well," Sharpclaw said, behind him, quietly. "It's just people looking," Harry said. "People looked at me my whole life at the Dursleys. I was always the wrong thing in the room." He glanced back. "This is the same, except now I'm supposed to be there." The Wizengamot registration clerk was a small, worried-looking wizard named Elphinstone who had been doing his job for 22 years and had, by his own accounting, never once had a morning like this one. He looked at Harry. He looked at the documents Goldtusk placed on his desk, the inheritance certification, the lineage documentation, the Gringotts medical certification of capacity, the formal seat claim for Potter, Gryffindor, and Peveril. He looked at all of it. He looked at Harry again. "He's 8, Elphinstone said. "The 3-seat provision makes age irrelevant," Goldtusk said. Section 42 of the Wizengamot Charter of 1692. "I know what's Section 42, he stopped. Picked up the Peveril documentation and read it very carefully. "Set it down." "The Peveril seat hasn't been claimed since 1849, Harry said. "The last heir died without issue, and the seat went dormant. It can only be claimed by a direct descendant through the paternal line. I am one." He met Elphinstone's eyes. "I'd like to claim it now, please." Elphinstone looked between the documentation and Harry twice more, the look of a man who could see exactly where his morning was going and was powerless to redirect it. He picked up his quill. "Name?" "Harrison James Potter," Harry said. "Heir to the ancient and noble houses of Potter, Gryffindor, and Peveril." The quill moved. 3 times. Each stroke had a weight to it that wasn't physical, a quality of permanence that Harry felt in his chest, not dramatically, but clearly. The way the click of a lock sounds when something is secured properly. Elphinstone stamped the documents with a seal that left a faint blue light in the air above them. "You're registered," he said. "Chamber opens in 12 minutes. Registered members enter through the main doors." "Thank you," Harry said. He turned and walked to the main chamber doors, and the 5 goblins walked with him, and Elphinstone sat at his desk for a moment with his stamp still in his hand and a faint blue light fading above 3 claims that had just changed the procedural landscape of the most powerful legal body in magical Britain. Then he reached for his fireplace and began notifying people. The Wizengamot chamber was a circle. That was the first thing Harry noticed. It was a complete circle, no head of the table, no architectural hierarchy. The tiered seating rose in rings around a central floor, and the seats were arranged so that everyone faced the center, faced each other. He'd read about it, but reading about it and standing on the central floor with 200 and some purple-robed witches and wizards staring down at him were different experiences. He stood on the central floor and looked up at them and did not feel small. The chamber had been filling since the doors opened. Word of his arrival had preceded him, Elphinstone's notification calls, probably, spreading through networks Harry didn't know yet but could infer from the speed with which every seat had filled and the quality of attention in the room. Not the normal half-present attention of a routine session. This was a room that was paying attention. Dumbledore was in the Chief Warlock's chair, elevated slightly from the main ring, with a desk in front of it. He was in full Wizengamot robes, and he looked precisely as he always looked in every description Harry had encountered, ancient, kindly, immeasurably wise. The half-moon spectacles. The silver beard. The eyes that were, Harry had expected cold, but they weren't cold. They were watching him with something that might have been genuine sadness, which was worse. Their eyes met across the chamber. Harry held the look for 3 full seconds. Then he turned away to survey the rest of the room, because he had things to do and an old man's feelings about his own choices were not his responsibility. Amelia Bones was in the DMLE Observer Gallery, with Proudfoot and 2 other Aurors. She gave Harry a single nod when he found her. He nodded back. Griselda Marchbanks was in her seat, 98 years old and as alert as anyone in the room. Several people Harry identified from Sharpclaw's briefings, allies, neutrals, the specific names that mattered. He mapped them as he swept the room, the way Griphook Sr. had taught him to read a space before engaging with it. Flintlock appeared at his elbow. Procedural session opens in 2 minutes. The moment Dumbledore calls the chamber to order and asks for floor business, you stand. I know, Harry said. Don't wait for him to give you the floor, I know, Harry said. Peveril Founder's standing. I don't need him to give me anything. Flintlock looked at him. Right, she said, and stepped back. The session was called to order. Dumbledore's voice carried the chamber with the ease of long practice, the voice of a man who had filled large rooms his entire life. Procedural motions, confirmations, the reading of minutes. Harry stood on the central floor and waited. Floor is open for business, Dumbledore said. His voice had an extra quality in it, careful, just slightly more measured than usual, the voice of someone navigating known minefields. Harry stepped forward. I have a statement under Peveril Founder's standing, he said, and his voice, he'd never tried to project it before, not deliberately, but it turned out that a core at 112% of projected baseline had opinions about how sound moved in a room, and his voice went to every corner of the chamber without effort. Every head turned. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. The chair recognizes, the Peveril seat doesn't require recognition from the chair, Harry said. Not rudely. Just factually. Under the Charter of 1692, Founder's standing precedes session order. I can speak now. A silence. Several people in the upper tiers were looking between Harry and Dumbledore with the avid attention of people watching something they'd tell their grandchildren about. Of course, Dumbledore said. His voice was smooth. His eyes were not. Please, Harry. Harry turned to face the chamber. Not Dumbledore. The chamber. My name is Harrison James Potter, he said. I'm 8 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was living in a cupboard under the stairs at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. I had been living there since I was 1 year old, when my parents were killed. He let that sit. Not for drama, just because the next part needed its own space. A Gringotts healer came to conduct an inheritance assessment. During that assessment, she found 28 illegal runes embedded in my magical core. Tracking runes. Suppression runes. Compulsion runes. Conditioning marks. He looked up at the tiers, letting his eyes move across the faces there, the shock, the calculation, the few who were carefully blank. Those runes suppressed my magic to 32% of its natural capacity for 8 years. They tracked my location continuously. They engineered emotional responses in me, specifically trust and deference towards certain individuals, and suppression of self-protective instincts. He paused. He looked at Dumbledore. The magical signature on all 28 runes has been identified, certified by 3 independent Gringotts analysts, and matched without ambiguity to one person. He looked back at the chamber. Albus Dumbledore. Whose signature is also on 8 years of unauthorized withdrawals from Potter family vaults, amounting to 96,000 galleons. Whose intervention ensured my legal guardians, Sirius Black, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were unavailable within weeks of my parents' deaths. whose fraudulent guardian status gave him legal access to my accounts and legal authority over my life for 8 years while I lived in a cupboard and was told my parents died in a car crash. The chamber was very quiet. I have documentation for every single claim I've just made, Harry said. Gringotts has filed formal charges. I am filing a personal complaint today, as heir to 3 seats in this chamber. And last night, he stopped for a beat. Last night, a man broke into Gringotts residential security and attempted to cast a killing curse at me while I was asleep. He has been interviewed by Gringotts security. His name is Corvin Selwyn. He is a member of this chamber. He looked directly at the seat where Selwyn was absent, conspicuously, the first time in a decade that seat had been empty at a session. He has provided full information about how he entered, who provided the security bypass, and who instructed him to go. The quiet shattered. The chamber erupted, not chaotically, but the way a dam breaks, in one decisive direction. Voices, exclamations, the physical movement of 200 people reacting simultaneously. Someone, Ogden, Harry thought, said something loudly that was lost in the noise. Harry stood on the central floor and waited. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. Griselda Marchbank's voice cut through the noise with the authority of 98 years. Order. Not a request. Just the word, spoken with sufficient certainty to actually work. The noise settled. She looked at Harry with those century-old eyes. Young man. The man who attempted, who provided the security bypass. Yes, Harry said. And you have this documented? Gringotts security ran a full interview beginning at 4:45 this morning, Harry said. The documentation has been submitted to Director Bones' office as of, he glanced at Goldtusk, who held up her hand. 40 minutes ago. Amelia Bones, in the observer gallery, opened her folder and held up the packet she'd received that morning. I have it, she said, into the sudden quiet. Every head in the chamber swiveled between Amelia and Dumbledore. Dumbledore stood. He was still composed, Harry gave him that, the man had extraordinary composure, but there was something different in how he stood now, some quality of the infinite patience he usually wore that had gone slightly strained at the edges. I want to address the chamber, he said. The floor is yours, Griselda said, with the tone of someone who genuinely did not know what he was going to say and was prepared to hear it. Dumbledore looked out at the assembled witches and wizards who had trusted him for 30 years, 40 years, some of them their entire professional lives. He looked at them the way Harry imagined he always did, with love, Harry thought. Real love. The kind that had somehow twisted itself into the shape of everything that had been done. Everything I did, Dumbledore said, was for the protection of this world. Harry Potter has a role to play in the war we all know is coming. A war that did not end in 1981 but merely paused. The prophecy, what prophecy? Said 6 voices simultaneously. Dumbledore stopped. There's a prophecy, Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd suspected since the conversation about the sacrifice rune, there was something that made a boy a predetermined weapon, and it wasn't strategic planning alone. It was being told you had no choice. Tell the chamber, Harry said. If my entire life has been arranged around a prophecy, the people making decisions about that life should probably know it exists. It is not, Dumbledore started. Tell them, Harry said, and there was nothing loud in it, nothing confrontational, just, absolute. The voice of someone who was done with information being managed. Or I find it myself. Dumbledore looked at him. Something moved in those old eyes, something Harry hadn't expected, something that was neither anger nor calculation but a kind of grief that was, Harry realized, genuine. The old man looked at him across the center of the Wizengamot chamber and saw, Harry thought, what 8 years of control had failed to produce, someone he couldn't predict. He had wanted a boy who would walk into fire because Dumbledore pointed at it. He had made instead someone who was deciding for themselves where the fires were. Born as the 7th month dies, Dumbledore said, quietly. To those who thrice defied him. Born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord shall mark him as his equal. But he shall have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives, Harry finished. Dumbledore stared at him. It's a reasonable inference, Harry said. From everything else. I worked it out 2 days ago. He turned back to the chamber, which had gone so quiet he could hear the magical hum of the recording quills. There is a prophecy that says I will face Voldemort and one of us will die. Dumbledore knew this. He used it, not to prepare me properly, not to give me the tools and the training and the knowledge I needed, but to manage me. To make me controllable enough to point at the problem and expendable enough to not worry about losing. He said it all very evenly. He did not make these choices because he hates me. He made them because he decided my life was a resource to be managed toward an outcome he chose. He turned, finally, to face Dumbledore directly. You don't get to decide what my life is for, Harry said. The prophecy can be real and you can still be wrong about what to do with it. The chamber was silent for 5 full seconds. Then Amelia Bones stood in the observer gallery. I'm formally requesting the Wizengamot approve a full investigation. Not a subcommittee review, a full chamber investigation with independent oversight, admissible documentation, and a complete audit of all decisions made regarding Harry Potter since 1981. She looked around the chamber. Who seconds? Griselda's hand went up before the question finished. Then Ogden. Then 7 others in rapid succession. Then, in 2s and 3s, a tide. Dumbledore stood in his chair and watched it. He didn't try to stop it. He was, Harry thought, too intelligent not to know when something had passed the point where stopping it was possible. The Chief Warlock's face was still, and he watched the hands go up around the chamber with the expression of a very old man who had built something magnificent and was watching it be dismantled, and could see, clearly, that he had made the thing that was dismantling it. The vote passed 63 to 11. The 11, Harry noted, would need to be understood later. The investigation was voted and formalized in under an hour. Amelia Bones was appointed lead investigator with full chamber authority. Dumbledore's chief warlock status was suspended pending the outcome, not stripped, suspended, which was a compromise that Griselda pushed for and got, and which Harry thought was probably right. The chamber needed room to breathe. Dumbledore left his chair with dignity. He nodded to several people. He passed through the central floor and paused, briefly, near Harry. You are remarkably like your mother, he said. Not unkindly. Not as manipulation, as far as Harry could tell, just a true thing, said because it was true. I know, Harry said. I've been learning about her. He met the old man's eyes. You should have just told me, you know. The prophecy, everything. I would have tried to be what you needed without the runes. You didn't have to take my choices away. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I was afraid, he said, very quietly. Of what you might choose. That's the thing about other people's choices, Harry said. You don't get a veto. Dumbledore walked out of the chamber with his escort, and the doors closed behind him, and the chamber exhaled. Harry stood on the central floor for another moment before Ragnarok materialized beside him. The director had been in the observer gallery but moved quickly. Well, Ragnarok said. Well, Harry agreed. The chamber voted correctly, the director said. The investigation will take months. His allies will cause difficulties. The 11 votes, I saw them, Harry said. I'd like a list. Ragnarok produced one from his jacket immediately. Harry took it, looked at it, folded it and put it in his pocket. There's something else, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him. Sirius Black, Harry said. He's in Azkaban. He hasn't had a trial, I checked this morning with Flintlock. There is no trial record. He was sent directly from the scene. He met the director's eyes. If Dumbledore manipulated his arrest, and based on the timing, the removal of all my designated guardians in quick succession, I think we can make that argument. Then Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 8 years without a trial for a crime that may have been engineered. Ragnarok was very still. The political capital to get a trial ordered, he started. We just got a 63-vote chamber majority on Dumbledore's suspension, Harry said. I'd like to use the momentum. The director looked at him for a long moment. Amelia Bones, he said. She's already holding the folder, Harry said. I need 5 minutes with her before she leaves the building. Ragnarok turned without another word and moved toward the observer gallery, and Harry followed, and behind them the Wizengamot chamber was still buzzing with the residue of the last 90 minutes, the sound of a world in the process of being substantially rearranged. Amelia Bones in person was shorter than she appeared in official capacity, which was to say that in official capacity she appeared about 10 feet tall, and in person she was an ordinary height woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a monocle she kept adjusting when she was thinking. She was adjusting it when Harry found her outside the observer gallery. You're better at this than anyone I've seen in 20 years of the job, she said, which was apparently how she opened conversations. I don't mean this room specifically. I mean, everything. The order of information, the timing, leaving the prophecy reveal for the chamber to hear so it couldn't be suppressed later. Sirius Black, Harry said. She stopped. Adjusted her monocle. I know. Flintlock found no trial record, there isn't one, Amelia said. He was classified as caught in the act under wartime provisions and sent directly to Azkaban. I've known that was irregular for years, but, she stopped. There were a lot of irregular things in the war's aftermath that people decided to leave alone because the alternative was reopening everything. We need to reopen this one, Harry said. He's my godfather. He was my designated primary guardian. If he's innocent, we don't know that he is, she said carefully. We don't know that he isn't, Harry said. And the difference matters, for him, rather significantly. He met her eyes. Can you get a hearing ordered? She thought about it for a moment. He watched her do the calculation, political capital, timing, what the chamber majority vote had just made possible versus what it had also made exhausting. She was a pragmatist. But she was also, Harry had assessed, someone who cared about what the law was actually for. Give me a week, she said. I'll file for a preliminary review. If the wartime provision was improperly applied, and I suspect it was, given everything else, then we can get a full hearing. Thank you, Harry said. She studied him for a moment. You're 8 years old, she said, in the tone of someone confirming a fact they keep finding hard to hold on to. I know, Harry said. I'm told it gets easier to believe. Amelia Bones laughed, a short, genuine sound, and held out her hand. Harry shook it. I'll be in touch, she said. They emerged from the ministry into London afternoon, real sky, grey and mild, with pigeons on the opposite ledge of the building across the street and the smell of rain coming. Harry stood on the pavement outside the telephone box entrance and breathed it in. Ragnarok was beside him. Goldtusk was already reviewing notes. Sharpclaw was on his second parchment of the afternoon. The investigation timeline, Ragnarok said. Months at minimum. Dumbledore's allies will use every procedural instrument available to delay. Let them delay, Harry said. Every day of delay is another day of documentation. Another day of public record. He looked up at the grey sky. He spent 43 years in private. Delays just mean more time in the light. And Voldemort? Ragnarok asked. Harry had been waiting for this question. It had been sitting in the background of everything since the morning Ragnarok told him what the sacrifice rune was for. The prophecy was real, he'd worked out the words, or close enough to them. One of them had to die. The prophecy said so. But prophecies, Harry had been reading, in the history books, in the runic theory texts, in the very old scrolls that Ragnarok had quietly left in his room about Peveril family research into fate and determinism, prophecies described a path. They didn't pave it. He'll come back, Harry said. He's not gone. He's diminished, like Dumbledore said. But he'll find a way back. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. And when he does, I'll be ready. Not because someone pointed at me and said go. Because I decided to be. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was measuring something. You'll need more training, he said. Griphook Sr. is good, but for what's coming you'll need more. I know, Harry said. I've been thinking about that. He'd been thinking about it since the training room, since the containment press that came from nowhere. There are things I can do that don't have names in the training literature yet. I want to understand them properly. I'll find the right teachers, Ragnarok said. I know you will, Harry said, and meant it fully. They walked back toward the telephone box. Passers-by moved around them, the usual London crowd, muggles going about their afternoon, entirely unaware that 10 feet away the remnants of a 43-year control structure were still settling into rubble and the boy it had been built around was deciding, freely, what happened next. Harry thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban. He thought about his mother's magic running through him like a current through deep water. He thought about 28 runes gone, the space they'd left now entirely his. He thought about Dumbledore's face when he'd said I was afraid of what you might choose. He thought about Voldemort, diminished and patient somewhere in the dark, waiting for the right moment. He thought, then we'll both be waiting. And I'll be using the time better. The telephone box opened. They filed in. The ministry descended away beneath them and London rose up, grey and real and entirely indifferent to prophecies. Harry rose with it. That night, in his room in the mountain, Harry wrote a letter. Not to Dumbledore. Not to Amelia Bones, not to Ragnarok, not to anyone in the machinery of what had happened today. He wrote to a woman he'd never met, whose name he'd found in the vault documentation and in the air placement records that Gringotts had recovered, a woman who had been waiting to be contacted for 8 years and never had been. Dear Mrs. Tonks, my name is Harry Potter. You were listed as my tertiary guardian in my parents' air placement documentation. You were never contacted. I'm sorry, that wasn't your fault or mine, and I thought you should know that I know you were supposed to be there. I don't know you yet. I'd like to, if you're willing. I'm told I have a cousin, Nymphadora, who is close to my age. I'm in Gringotts for the foreseeable future, but I think I'll be somewhere more permanent soon. I'm also trying to get my godfather out of Azkaban. I could use anyone on my side who knew my parents. Harry Potter. He read it back. Added a line. P.S. I'm not what the papers are going to say about me tomorrow. I'm not sure what I am yet, exactly, but I'm working on it. He sealed it and left it for the Morning Post. Then he opened the runic theory book to the chapter he'd been working through, ancient ward construction, specifically the kind of wards that could be keyed to a magical signature and would recognize hostile intent before any spell was cast, and read until the fire globe dimmed itself. He turned it back up. He had things to finish. Chapter 6, The Boy Who Chose 3 Months Past. Not quietly, nothing in Harry Potter's life was quiet anymore, and he'd decided he preferred it that way. The Wizengamot investigation moved the way large legal machinery moved, grinding, thorough, occasionally spectacular. Dumbledore's allies filed 9 separate procedural challenges. 6 were dismissed. 2 were partially upheld in ways that delayed specific document admissions by several weeks. The 9th was still pending when, on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, the investigation committee released its interim findings and the Prophet ran the headline across its entire front page in type so large it was almost embarrassing. Harry read it over breakfast with a cup of the tea that took warmth seriously and a plate of eggs and made no particular face about it. He'd stopped reading about himself in the Prophet after the 3rd week, when it became clear the paper was going to write whatever made for the most dramatic story regardless of what was actually true. He read it for information about what the public was being told, not for accuracy. 12 sitting Wizengamot members formally censured, Ragnarok said, from across the table. The director had developed a habit of joining Harry for breakfast on days when significant things happened, which was most days now. 3 suspended. The audit of Dumbledore's financial activities has expanded to include Order of the Phoenix operational funds. I saw, Harry said. The 11 who voted against the investigation, how many are in the 3 suspended? 2, Ragnarok said. The others are cooperating fully now that the wind has changed. Political creatures, Harry said, without particular judgment. They'll be useful when the political climate is reliably different. Ragnarok looked at him over his own cup. You're not angry about the opportunism. Why would I be? They're going to help finish what needs finishing. He pushed the prophet aside. Dumbledore's solicitor filed again yesterday, the hearing date challenge. Denied, Ragnarok said. The hearing is in 6 weeks. It will happen. Harry nodded. He thought about 6 weeks and what they contained, and what he needed to be ready for by then. The months had not been wasted. Griphook Sr. had declared, at the 6-week mark, that Harry had exceeded every developmental benchmark the tutor had benchmarked against and that he would need to identify what came next. What came next, it turned out, was a rotating series of specialists that Ragnarok assembled with the focused intent of someone who had decided that whatever Harry Potter was going to become, he was going to become it properly. There was an elderly Egyptian cursebreaker named Khalid who had spent 40 years working with magical constructs older than most wizarding civilizations, and who taught Harry to read ambient magical signatures in spaces the way you read current in moving water, not by looking directly but by feeling where the flow went. There was a rune singer from the Scandinavian goblin tradition named Brynja who worked with him on the interaction between runic arrays and living magic, and under her instruction Harry discovered that he could feel a rune working from across a room, identify its function, and in some cases unravel it without touching it. And there was a woman named Phileas Flitwick, no relation to the Hogwarts professor. She was emphatic about this, a half-goblin charms theorist who had written 3 books Harry had already read and who looked at his magical signature with the expression of someone opening a letter they'd been waiting for their whole career. You're doing charms without the charm, she told him, on their second session, watching him lift and precisely arrange 6 objects simultaneously with the focused intention she'd specifically said he should not be able to manage. You're going directly from intent to result. Do you know what years of training that normally requires? I'm guessing more than 2 months, Harry said, setting the objects back down in exactly the order they'd been in before. The theory says it's impossible before 12, she said. The practical record is 11, one case, a witch in the 1800s who was considered an anomaly. She made a note. You're 8. 8 and a bit, Harry said. She looked at him. How do you do it? He thought about how to explain it. It's like, most people have to translate, he said finally. You have the thought, and then you have to put it into the right spell, and the spell is the instruction the magic follows. I just skipped the translation. The magic already knows what I mean. She wrote something very fast. The compression theory, she muttered to herself. Rotgut was right, but I don't think anyone understood how far right. She looked up. Do you know what you are? Getting there, Harry said. The letter from Andromeda Tonks had arrived 3 days after Harry sent his. It was warm and careful in equal measure, the letter of someone who had been hurt before and was approaching something new with open hands and slightly braced shoulders. She wrote about his mother, briefly but specifically, 2 sentences that landed like they meant something, because they were details that only someone who had actually known Lily Potter would know. She wrote about her daughter Nymphadora, who went by Tonks, who was 11 and furious about being at school when she should be meeting her cousin. She wrote, I would like to meet you very much. I should have fought harder 8 years ago to find out where you were. I didn't, and that's on me, and I'm sorry. Harry had written back the same day. They'd met in person 2 weeks later, in a private room at Gringotts, Andromeda Black Tonks, who had walked out of her family for love and built something real in the space they'd left, who looked at Harry across a table and immediately said, You have your mother's eyes and your father's complete inability to pretend to be smaller than you are, and smiled at him with something that was genuine relief. He'd liked her immediately. He liked the way she occupied space, solidly, without performing anything. She'd sat across from him for 2 hours and treated him like someone whose thoughts were worth listening to, which was still new enough to notice. Tonks was still at Hogwarts but wrote letters. They were chaotic letters, full of crossed-out words and small drawings in the margins and the particular energy of someone who had opinions about everything and wanted to share all of them with someone who might appreciate them. Harry wrote back, and found it unexpectedly easy. He was building something. He could feel it taking shape the way you feel a wall going up, not dramatically, brick by brick, but in the accumulated reality of time and intention. The hearing for Sirius Black was granted on a Wednesday, 4 months after Harry's morning in the Wizengamot chamber. Amelia Bones had worked through it methodically, first the preliminary review, which found sufficient irregularity in the original wartime classification, then the formal application for a full hearing, then 6 weeks of Sirius Black's legal team preparing a case that Amelia had moved quietly to make possible by ensuring the right documentation reached the right people. Harry was in the chamber for it. He'd been granted observer status, which given his Wizengamot seating was more procedurally interesting than actually limiting. He could observe and, if asked, speak, but it wasn't his hearing to run. He didn't need to run it. He sat in the observer gallery and watched Sirius Black be brought in from Azkaban. He'd read the descriptions, gaunt, exhausted, 12 years of Dementors having taken their toll. The man who walked into the chamber was all of that, but there was something underneath the damage that wasn't broken. Harry had gotten good at reading what was underneath things. Sirius Black was brought in, sat down, and looked around the chamber with the eyes of someone reassembling their understanding of where they were and what was happening. Then his eyes found Harry in the observer gallery and stopped. They looked at each other. Black looked, Harry didn't have a good word for it. Like a man seeing something he'd given up believing in. His hands were still chained, and he was still gaunt, and he still had 12 years of Azkaban sitting on him, but he sat straighter. Harry gave him a nod. Small, deliberate, meant. Sirius Black's jaw worked once. He nodded back. The hearing took 3 hours. Harry listened to every word of it, the testimony, the Veritasrum questioning, the documentation of Peter Pettigrew's fake death, the evidence of the secret keeper switch, the complete absence of any trial record or legal process in 1981. He listened to the Wizengamot member who'd classified Black under wartime provisions. The man was 74 and had the expression of someone who had been telling himself a particular story for 12 years and could feel it dissolving, try to justify a decision that looked, from the outside, increasingly like following an instruction he hadn't questioned. He listened to Sirius Black, under Veritasrum, describe the night James and Lily Potter died with a clarity that cost him something visible, in a voice that didn't break but came close, and he thought about his parents, the people he was learning to know backward from the evidence of who had loved them, and felt the shape of the loss cleanly for the first time. Not the performed grief of a child who'd been told he should feel sad. The actual thing, specific and sharp. The verdict was not guilty. Unanimous. It came down with the weight of a decision that everyone in the room knew was going to matter for a long time. The chains came off. Sirius Black sat for a moment with his hands free, looking at them. Then he looked up, across the chamber, to the observer gallery. Harry was already standing. They met outside the chamber, in a corridor that Amelia Bones had specifically arranged to be cleared for 10 minutes. Ragnarok stood at the far end of it, not interfering, present in the way that mattered. Sirius Black looked terrible and looked like himself, which Harry understood from nothing more than Andromeda's description of him and his father's photo albums, and yes, Gringotts had his parents' photo albums, recovered from the vaults, and Harry had spent several evenings looking at them with a thoroughness that might have looked like obsession but was actually just catching up. He looked at Harry Potter in the corridor and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to hold its shape, "You look exactly like James." "Except the eyes," Harry said. "I know. Mum's eyes." Sirius Black made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the opposite. 12 years, he said, and it was its own complete sentence, containing everything. "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry it took this long. When I found out, how old are you?" Sirius said. He looked at Harry with the slightly unfocused attention of someone recalibrating everything. "How old were you when you, 8 when the rune removal started?" Harry said. "I'm nearly 9 now." He paused. "You were supposed to be my guardian. You were supposed to be raising me." "Yes," Sirius said. His voice cracked on it, just slightly. "You didn't know," Harry said. "You didn't abandon me. I know that." And, he stopped, considered how to say the next part. "I'm alright. I want you to know that. Not in the way people say it when they're not, actually alright. I'm genuinely alright. I had good help." He looked down the corridor at Ragnarok, who was studying the ceiling with elaborate neutrality. "A lot of good help." Sirius followed his look. "You've been living in Gringotts?" "4 months," Harry said. "It's grown on me." "You've been living in a bank." "A mountain," Harry said. "There's a distinction. The bank is just what's inside the mountain." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening in his face, complicated, multiple things running at once, the expression of a man who had survived by not feeling too much and was now being asked to feel quite a lot. "James would have found that hilarious," he said. "His son living in Gringotts. The goblins would have had heart attacks." "Director Ragnarok has been very kind," Harry said. "Director Ragnarok," Sirius repeated, with the faint incredulity of someone discovering the world has reorganized while they were away. "Ragnarok is your—" "Not exactly," Harry said. "But sort of." He paused. "Are you going to be alright?" "Is there somewhere?" "Grimmauld Place," Sirius said. "The family house. It's mine now, my mother's dead, apparently, which I feel entirely neutral about." He looked at Harry carefully. "Would you, when I've had time to make it habitable, would you want to?" "Yes," Harry said. Simply, directly, before the question finished. Sirius looked at him with those dark eyes that had 12 years and James Potter and everything else in them. "You don't even know what I was going to ask," he said. "You were going to ask if I'd like somewhere to be when I'm not here," Harry said. "Yes. I would." Sirius Black laughed. A real one this time, short and surprised and genuine. "James's son," he said. "Absolutely James's son." "Half mums," Harry said. "Oh, definitely," Sirius said. "The terrifying half." The Dumbledore hearing was set for the 3rd week of November. In the 6 weeks before it, 4 things happened. First, 3 of Dumbledore's remaining significant Wisengamot allies formally withdrew their support and provided statements to the investigation committee, citing the interim findings and the weight of the financial evidence. The statements were careful, lawyered within an inch of their lives, containing nothing that admitted they'd known anything directly, but the withdrawal was real, and its effect on the remaining holdouts was visible. Second, Harry received a letter from someone claiming to speak for Tom Riddle. It arrived through ordinary post, addressed in a hand that was perfectly ordinary and utterly anonymous, postmarked from Edinburgh, containing a single page of very good parchment. The letter was, Harry had to give the author credit, well written. It didn't threaten. It didn't demand. It offered a conversation. "You've demonstrated considerable ability in removing the tools others placed on you. Lord Voldemort respects capability. He would like to speak with you about your future, which is, as you may be aware, intertwined with his by a prophecy that neither of you authored. There are arrangements that could benefit you both. Should you wish to respond, you know how to find those who serve him. One conversation, nothing more." Harry read it. He showed it to Ragnarok. He showed it to Amelia Bones. He let it be added to the investigation file as evidence that Voldemort was sufficiently back to be communicating via Edinburgh post offices. Then he sat down and wrote a response, which he sent through the same postal route the letter had implied. "I've read your letter. Thank you for acknowledging the prophecy. Dumbledore spent a lot of energy trying to manage it, and it's refreshing to be addressed directly. I'm not interested in an arrangement. I've recently spent 4 months removing what happens when powerful people decide my life is a resource to be allocated. I'm not looking to add another one. If you'd like to discuss the prophecy itself, what it means, what the options actually are, I'm open to that. But not through intermediaries, and not on terms where you begin with the assumption that I'm a problem you're solving. Harry Potter P.S. I know where your Horcruxes are. Or at least how to find them. This is relevant to any conversation about the future. He didn't know exactly where they were. He knew what they were, he'd worked that out from the runic theory, from the magical theory, from the reading he'd been doing for 4 months, and he knew the method, which was in some ways more useful than a list. He included the postscript because the conversation needed a foundation, and the foundation was that he wasn't approaching this as the frightened, suppressed boy the prophecy had been made about. No response came. He hadn't entirely expected one, but he'd established what he needed to establish. He was not manageable. By anyone. Third, Harry quietly commissioned Goldtusk to begin the legal recovery of assets from Dumbledore's known holdings sufficient to cover the 96,000 galleons withdrawn from the Potter vaults. Goldtusk did so with the focused precision of someone who had been waiting to do exactly this for 4 months. The process was slow, because Dumbledore had been careful with money the way he was careful with everything, but Gringotts was patient. Fourth, Harry went to see his parents' house. Ragnarok arranged it. A car, a real car, a driver, nothing magical, to Godric's Hollow, on a Saturday morning in October when the sky was high and cold and the countryside was turning itself orange and gold in long sheets of color that Harry watched from the back window and thought was possibly the most beautiful thing he'd seen in 4 months of living in a mountain. Godric's Hollow was a small village. It had a church and a square and the particular quality of English villages that had been there long enough to stop trying to explain themselves. They'd told him the house had been a ruin for 8 years, preserved by a ministry memorial charm that kept it from being demolished but also kept it from being repaired, which Harry had opinions about that he kept to himself for now. The ruins were on a quiet lane. The front wall had partially collapsed, and the upper story was open to the sky, and there were vines growing through what had been windows. The ministry had added an invisible plaque at some point, you had to be a witch or wizard to read it, and walking past it Harry felt it tell him what he already knew. Here died James and Lily Potter, October 31, 1981. He stood in front of the ruins for a while. Not performing grief, not managing it. Just, there, being in the actual place, letting it be what it was. He thought about his father, who had apparently died without his wand, buying seconds for his wife and son without hesitating. He thought about his mother, who had died refusing to step aside, and whose love had left something in Harry's skin that a killing curse couldn't get through. He thought about what kind of people they must have been, to make those choices in those seconds, and what he must have inherited from them that Dumbledore had spent 8 years trying to contain. He reached out with his magic and felt the house. The ruin of it, the structure still standing in some places, old and weathered but present. He felt the wards, not Dumbledore's wards, these were older, his parents' work, still faintly active after 8 years in the way that strong magic was, like a heartbeat that hadn't quite stopped. He thought, I'm going to restore this. Not now. Not today. But eventually, when the legal picture was clearer, when there was time. He was going to learn how to rebuild a ward structure, and he was going to bring this house back from what had been done to it, and it was going to stand properly. He was in that frame of thought, practical, specific, the thing he did when emotions became action, when he heard footsteps behind him and turned. An old woman. Very old, moving slowly with a cane, who had clearly come out of the cottage next door and was watching him with eyes that were filmy with age but sharp underneath. You're his boy, she said. No preamble. James's boy. I'd know those eyes anywhere, Lily's, actually, but you know what I mean. Bathilda Bagshot? Harry said. He'd read Gringotts' village documentation for Godric's Hollow. She was the only person still in residence who'd known his parents. Retired, she said, which he thought was an interesting way to confirm it. I haven't been able to write for a few years now. The hands. She looked at the ruin. I've been next to this for 8 years. It's wrong, leaving it like this. They were good neighbors. I know, Harry said. I'm going to fix it. She looked at him. How old are you? 8 and a bit, Harry said. He'd said it a lot recently. Nearly 9. She said, with the supreme unimpressibility of someone who had lived through the original conflict, the subsequent one, and most of a century of magical politics. You've had a time of it, I hear. I've had a productive autumn, Harry said. She made a sound that was definitely a laugh, short and sharp. They stood together in front of the ruin for a few minutes without speaking, which was the most companionable silence Harry had experienced in recent memory. She pointed out, briefly, where the garden had been. His mother had grown herbs, practical ones, because Lily Potter had never done anything without a use attached to it. She said his father had once accidentally transfigured her fence into an iguana and had been so mortified he'd fixed her gutters for a month in apology. Harry stored both pieces away carefully, in the collection he was building of things that had been true about his parents. Come back, Bathilda said, when they were done standing there. When it's restored. I'd like to see that. I will, Harry said. He was in his room the night before the hearing, not reading, not working, just sitting with the fire globe at half brightness and thinking about choices. The hearing tomorrow was Dumbledore's formal accounting, not a criminal trial, not yet, that came later through the DMLE's parallel process. This was the Wisengamot's own reckoning with a member of its body, a holder of its highest office, who had violated its trust and its laws. It was where the political weight of the last 4 months would concentrate itself. Harry was going to speak. They'd asked him, formally asked, which he appreciated, and he'd agreed. He thought about what to say. Not the structure, he had the structure. He thought about what it was, underneath the structure. What it was for. He kept coming back to the same thing. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. He'd examined that, genuinely, and found that what he felt wasn't revenge. Revenge wanted suffering. What he wanted was, correction. He wanted the record to say clearly what had happened and to whom, so that it couldn't be smoothed over or re-narrativized into something easier to live with. He wanted whatever mechanisms existed for this kind of abuse to be strengthened, so that the next child who was supposed to be protected had better odds. He wanted Sirius Black to have already had 4 months of sunlight instead of still being inside Azkaban when Harry found out. He wanted his parents' house to not be a ruin. He wanted a lot of things that punishment couldn't retroactively create. But the hearing could create a record. The record could become the reason things changed. That was enough. Not everything he'd wanted, but enough. He was still sitting with the fire globe at half brightness when Ragnarok knocked, which was unusual. The director had never knocked in the evening before. Come in, Harry said. Ragnarok entered. He had something in his hand, a small wooden box, the kind that held things you didn't want damaged. He crossed the room, set it on the desk beside Harry, and stepped back. Your parents' personal effects, the director said. Recovered from the vault when we secured it. These specifically were listed in a separate ledger as items to be given to you on the occasion of your formal inheritance claim. He paused. I've been holding them since we secured the vault. I should have given them to you sooner. He stopped. I didn't know when the right moment was. Harry looked at the box. He looked at Ragnarok. The director was standing with his hands behind his back and his jaw set, and he was looking at a point approximately 6 inches to the left of Harry's face, which Harry had learned was what Ragnarok did when he was feeling something he hadn't prepared to feel. Thank you, Harry said. He meant it for more than the box. Tomorrow, Ragnarok said. Tomorrow, Harry agreed. The director left. Harry opened the box. Inside, his mother's wedding ring, which she hadn't been wearing when she died and which therefore survived. A photo of his parents at what looked like a party, both of them laughing at something out of frame, young and alive and entirely themselves. A letter in his mother's handwriting addressed to him that began Harry, if you're reading this, something went wrong, and I want you to know," and which Harry read once, slowly, and then set aside to read again later when he had the room to sit fully inside it. A folded piece of parchment with his father's handwriting, which turned out to be a list of spells, specifically, in James Potter's hand, annotated with comments that were funny and specific and exactly what you'd expect from a man who had made transfiguring his neighbor's fence into an iguana a genuine accident. And at the bottom of the box, carefully wrapped, a snitch. An actual golden snitch, the wings folded, perfectly still, with a small note attached in his mother's writing, "First catch." He caught it in his mouth on a broom at 2 years old. James nearly died of pride. Harry sat with the snitch in his hand for a while. Then he put everything back in the box carefully, turned the fire globe to the right brightness, and went to sleep. The Wizengamot chamber on the morning of the hearing was a different animal from any session Harry had attended. The public gallery, which normally didn't exist for closed sessions but which the committee had voted to open for this one, because what was done in private could be answered in public, was full. Every seat in the chamber was occupied. Dumbledore arrived with his legal counsel. He looked, Harry thought, like himself, still the ancient, still the silver beard, still the half-moon spectacles. But there was something different in how the room received him. The reflex that had always existed, the physical straightening when Dumbledore walked into a space, the automatic deference, was present, but it was present the way a habit is present, consciously and slightly awkwardly, rather than automatically. The room had learned to notice the reflex. Harry sat in the Potter seat. He'd claimed all 3 seats formally, but the Potter seat was where he was today, because that's who was here today, not the heir of ancient houses, not the political player, just Harry Potter, whose life had been the subject of the decisions being examined. The session was chaired by Griselda Marchbanks, who had been voted into the temporary chair position for the hearing with the overwhelming support of a chamber that had decided, collectively, that the person conducting this particular examination should be someone who didn't owe Dumbledore anything. The evidence was presented over 2 hours. Financial records. Runic analysis. The heir placement documentation. The fraudulent guardian extension paperwork. The interview transcripts from Corvin Selwyn, who had accepted a reduced outcome in exchange for full cooperation and whose account of the assassination attempt was entered into the formal record with a specificity that left no room for ambiguity. Dumbledore's counsel tried 4 times to challenge admissibility on technical grounds. 3 were dismissed by Griselda with a brevity that suggested she had a list and was working through it. Then Harry was called to speak. He stood. He walked to the central floor, which he had stood on before, 4 months ago, in clothes that fit, with his hands at his sides and his chin level. He looked up at the chamber. "I'm not going to repeat the evidence," he said. "It's all been presented and it speaks clearly. What I want to do is say what the evidence doesn't automatically say, what it meant, specifically, to be on the receiving end of it." He looked at Dumbledore, briefly, then back to the chamber. "I lived in a cupboard for 6 years, he said. "Not because my aunt and uncle are uniquely cruel people, though they aren't kind ones. But because the person who placed me with them knew what kind of household they ran and placed me there anyway, and made sure I had no way to understand that I could ask for help or find another option, because he removed the instincts that would have led me to do that. I had compulsion runes suppressing self-advocacy from the time I was 1 year old." He paused. "I found out 3 months ago that I have 3 Wizengamot seats. That I have a godfather. That I have an aunt who wanted to know me. That my core output was 32% of its potential. That there was a prophecy about my life that had been used to justify managing me like a resource." He looked steadily at the chamber. "None of this information was kept from me because I was too young to handle it. Children can handle truth in age-appropriate forms. It was kept from me because an informed Harry Potter was an unpredictable Harry Potter, and unpredictable wasn't useful." He let that sit. "What I want the record to say," he said, "is not just that illegal runes were placed on a child, though that is what the law needs to address. I want the record to say that this happened because we built a system where one person's judgment went unchecked for decades because we decided his track record made oversight unnecessary. We decided that someone good enough to have been right about important things in the past couldn't be wrong about this. He looked around the tiers. That's not about Albus Dumbledore specifically. That's about how we arrange power. And if nothing changes about how power is arranged, the name at the center of the next version of this story will just be different. He stepped back. That's what I wanted to say, he said. Thank you. He walked back to the Potter's seat and sat down. The chamber was very quiet. Griselda Marchbanks looked at him for a moment, with those century-old eyes, and something in her face said yes. Exactly that. She didn't say it out loud. She turned to the chamber and opened deliberation. The outcome was what the evidence demanded. Dumbledore's positions were stripped: Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, the formal roles that had given him institutional power alongside his personal authority. Formal criminal referral to the DMLE for prosecution on the financial charges, the illegal rune placement, the fraudulent guardian status, and the conspiracy charge related to the assassination attempt. A full review of every legal decision he'd been involved in relating to Harry Potter since 1981, with powers to revisit outcomes. He was not imprisoned, pending trial. He was placed under a monitoring charm and restricted from contact with Harry Potter or any Wisengamot proceedings while the DMLE case was built. Dumbledore accepted the Chamber's ruling with the dignity of someone who had known it was coming and had decided, somewhere in the process, to stop fighting the current. He stood when the ruling was read, and nodded once to the chair, and looked at Harry once, just briefly, at the end, from across the chamber. Harry met his eyes. In the old man's face, he saw something he hadn't expected, not defeat, not anger, but the particular expression of someone who has finally looked clearly at the architecture of their own choices and found it wanting. Not a good man discovering he was bad. A man who had told himself a particular story for 43 years finally hearing it from the outside. Harry didn't smile at him. He didn't nod. He simply held the look long enough to acknowledge it, and then looked away first, because there was a lot happening in the chamber around him and none of it was about Dumbledore anymore. Outside, afterward, in the corridor, Sirius Black was waiting. He looked better than he had at the hearing, for months of sunlight and food and whatever process of reconstituting himself he was doing, still gaunt, still damaged in the visible ways and probably many invisible ones, but standing with a quality of intention that hadn't been there in October. He fell into step beside Harry as they walked out, which was slightly unusual given the height difference. Sirius was tall, considerably taller than Harry, but he adjusted for it without apparent awareness of doing so. "That was well said," he said. "In there. What you said." "Thank you," Harry said. "The bit about power not checking itself, you sound like your mother. She used to say things like that in school and the professors never quite knew whether to give her detention or take points." He glanced down at Harry. She was always right, which was the problem. Harry thought about the letter in the box, which he'd read 3 times now, the 3rd time completely, sitting with it. The letter his mother had written to him in the knowledge that something might go wrong, and which had told him in precise and loving terms exactly what she wanted for him, and which had ended, "You were always enough. Whatever they tell you, whatever they try to make you, you were always exactly enough." "I know," Harry said. "She sounds like she was." Sirius said nothing for a moment. They walked. "Grimmauld Place," he said, eventually. "It's habitable now. More or less. There's one room that's still a problem but the house generally isn't trying to kill you." He said it with the casual familiarity of someone for whom houses trying to kill you was a meaningful data point. "If you want it, I'll come for Christmas," Harry said. "If that works." Sirius stopped walking. Harry stopped with him. Sirius Black, who had been James Potter's best friend, who had been described to Harry by Andromeda as being able to fill any room he walked into just by existing in it, who had spent 12 years in a place designed to strip people of themselves and hadn't let it, looked at Harry with an expression that was doing several things at once and keeping none of them particularly under control. That works, he said. His voice was steady except for the very end of it. Yeah. That works perfectly. Good, Harry said. I'll bring food. Ragnarok has opinions about nutrition that I've started to share. Sirius laughed. It was the same surprised laugh as in October, the one that came from somewhere genuine. Of course you befriended the director of Gringotts. He befriended me, Harry said. Technically. James would have loved this, Sirius said, more to the corridor than to Harry. Then, to Harry, he would have loved you. Harry didn't say anything to that. He just, let it be there, the way you let something stand when it's right and doesn't need a response, and they walked out of the ministry together into the grey November afternoon, and the city carried on around them, indifferent and busy and real. That evening, Harry sat in his room in the mountain and wrote in a notebook he'd started keeping 2 weeks in, not a diary. He didn't have the patience for daily narration, but a place for things he wanted to think through properly. He wrote about what the hearing had felt like from the inside, which was not like triumph. He wrote about the difference between ending something and completing it, and how today had been more of the latter, not a victory over Dumbledore but a closing of the loop that had opened on a doorstep in Godric's Hollow when he was 1 year old. He wrote about what came next, because his habit of mind didn't allow him to stay in the completed thing for long. He had a list, the DMLE prosecution, which would take a year at minimum. The Horcrux question, which was its own entire problem that he was building a plan around, quietly, with Khalid's guidance on ancient magical constructs and his own runic theory work. Sirius's continued recovery. Grimmauld Place at Christmas. Hogwarts, which was coming in 2 years, which was going to be its own fascinating landscape of new people and existing institutional dynamics and a school where the recently stripped headmaster had spent 40 years shaping everything. He was going to Hogwarts. He had decided this. He was also going to Hogwarts as Harry Potter, not as the carefully managed boy Dumbledore had been building, and the difference was going to be noticeable from the first moment. He found he was looking forward to it. He wrote, "The prophecy says one of us has to die." I think Dumbledore read this as, Harry has to be willing to die. I read it differently. I think it means Voldemort has to be fully killed, all the pieces of him, not just the main fragment. That's what "neither can live while the other survives" actually means. Not sacrifice. Completion. There's a difference. He thought about the Horcruxes, 6, he estimated, based on the magical theory. 6 pieces of a soul that Tom Riddle had carved away and hidden. He thought about how you found them, and what you did with them once you found them, and how much of that he could accomplish before Voldemort reconstituted himself enough to be a direct problem. He had time. Maybe 2 years. Maybe 3. He intended to use them. He closed the notebook. He looked at the fire globe, which was at the exact brightness he wanted. He thought about his mother's letter, and his father's annotated spell list, and the golden snitch that had started everything, in a way, a 2-year-old on a broom catching something with his mouth while his father nearly died of pride. He thought about who Harry Potter was. Not the boy who lived, which was a title that had been stuck on him by other people's need for a story. Not the weapon Dumbledore had tried to build, or the manageable asset Voldemort's letter had assumed he'd be interested in becoming. Not the cupboard child, not the rune suppressed, not the heir to 3 seats performing the role that came with the inheritance. Harry Potter was a boy who had woken up in a mountain 4 months ago to find that everything he'd been told about himself was built on a lie, and had responded by learning everything he could, as fast as he could, and making his own decisions about what mattered. That, it turned out, was enough to be. More than enough. He turned off the fire globe with a thought and lay in the mountain's quiet and listened to the stone breathe around him, old and patient and immovable, having seen everything and still standing, and thought about the morning and the things it would contain. He thought, I choose what happens next. Not the prophecy. Not Dumbledore. Not Voldemort. Him. He went to sleep. Outside the mountain, November London moved through its evening, ordinary and unaware. In Azkaban, Tom Riddle's remaining fragment shivered against a future that was no longer shaped the way it expected. In a house on a square in London, Sirius Black sat in a room he was learning to live in again and thought about Christmas. In a village cottage in Godric's Hollow, an old woman who had known both Potters was thinking about a boy who said I'm going to fix it with the easy certainty of someone who meant it. And in the ruins on the lane, the old wards, his mother's work, his father's, laid into stone and soil in the last years of their lives, pulsed once, faint but real, like a greeting. Like a recognition. Like something that had been waiting for its heir to come home.